Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I remember the moment I stepped inside this house. The front door creaked and I paused with my hand on the knob. I felt my heart pushing against my ribs. I saw dust floating in the light that came from outside. I smelled wood and something stale. My eyes tried to adjust to the dim hallway. I tasted the stale air when I opened my mouth. I stood there with my shoes on a worn rug that smelled like old carpet and damp corners. The house was mine now. I had the deed. I had the key. I was alone. I walked in and closed the door. My shoulders felt tense and I kept turning my head. I heard nothing but my own breathing. I rubbed my face with my hand. My skin felt damp, even though the air was dry. I noticed deep scratches on the walls. They went along the hallway, starting near the floor and rising toward the ceiling. I touched one with my fingertips. The wood was rough, uneven. The scratches looked old. I guessed they had been there for decades. I tried not to think about what made them. I continued through the hallway and reached a large living room. The furniture was covered with white sheets. The floor creaked under my weight. I smelled dust and something bitter. I lifted one sheet and found an old sofa with heavy fabric that felt rough against my palm. There were old portraits on the walls. Each had a simple frame covered in a thin layer of grime. The people in the portraits wore old-fashioned clothes. Their eyes looked straight out. When I moved, I felt their eyes follow me. I knew it was just my mind playing tricks. Still, I got a cold feeling in my arms. I forced myself to keep looking. Their faces were serious, stiff, and the paint looked cracked in places. My footsteps echoed in the silence. I inspected a corridor to the left. It led to a few closed doors. I tried one door. It stuck, but after leaning my shoulder into it, it opened with a groan. Inside was a small study. A single desk with a broken chair, some shelves, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. I smelled old paper. I coughed. My throat felt scratchy. I found some old letters tied with string, but I could not make out the handwriting in the dim light. I put them back. I decided to pick a bedroom on the second floor and set up a place to sleep. I found the main staircase. Each step made noise. My legs felt heavy. I felt a knot in my stomach that I could not explain. On the second floor, the air felt heavier. The windows in the hallway were small and dirty. The light coming in was weak. I saw a series of doors. Some were open, others closed. The smell of old plaster and damp wood made my nose itch. I picked a room at the end. It had a large bed frame without a mattress. I brought in my sleeping bag and a flashlight from my car. I placed my stuff on the wooden boards. The boards were dusty and had small, dark stains. I did not want to think about what caused them. I tested the door lock. It seemed to work. I planned to lock myself in at night. My chest felt tight, but I tried to ignore it. As evening came, I went back downstairs. I had some canned food and a bottle of water. I sat in the living room on the old sofa, now uncovered, and ate. The silence felt unnatural. The wind outside made a light tapping against the window. I kept looking over my shoulder. I had a flashlight on my lap. My hands were sweaty. I swallowed hard. I tried to distract myself by checking my phone. There was no signal. The battery icon made me uneasy. I knew I had to save it. Night fell, and I decided to stay quiet, to listen. I turned off the flashlight and sat there in the dark. I could make out shapes, the edge of a table, a lamp, the outline of a tall cabinet. My ears picked up every small sound. I heard a creak upstairs. It could be settling wood. I heard a soft shuffle, like a foot dragging across the floor. I froze. My breathing grew shallow. I waited. The sound stopped. I waited a while longer, then turned the flashlight on and aimed it up the staircase. Empty space. No movement. I returned to my makeshift bedroom. I locked the door. I spread my sleeping bag on the floor and lay down. My heart pounded in my ears. I kept the flashlight near my hand. I tried to rest. Hours passed. I might have dozed off. At some point, I woke up to a sound. Footsteps. They were slow and steady. They moved through the hallway outside my door. The boards creaked under each step. I held my breath. The steps came closer, paused at my door, then continued on. I touched the floor with my fingertips, feeling the vibration. There was no voice, no breathing other than my own. My stomach tightened. My neck felt stiff. I did not move until the sound faded. In the morning, I felt weak and tired. I stood, stretched my arms, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The air smelled the same. No footprints on the dusty floor. I checked carefully. Just my own from the day before. I felt a surge of frustration, but I said nothing. I went downstairs and decided to explore the left wing of the house. There was a door at the end of a corridor that I had not opened. It was stuck. I pressed my shoulder against it, tried kicking the lower part. It moved a bit, then I managed to open it. Inside was a dining room with a long wooden table and several chairs. On the walls, more portraits. I felt their eyes on me again. Their paint was chipped. Their frames were uneven. I moved closer to one and looked at the eyes. I saw brushstrokes, cracked paint, and a layer of dirt. I stepped sideways. The eyes seemed to follow my movement. I stepped to the other side. The same effect. I could feel my chest tighten again. I left the dining room and found a narrow door near the kitchen area. It led to a small staircase going down. I smelled damp earth. It must have been a root cellar. I shone the flashlight. The steps were stone. The air was cold. I heard a drip of water somewhere below. I decided not to go down yet. I felt uneasy. I closed the door and walked away. I spent the afternoon checking closets, drawers, and cabinets. Most were empty or filled with useless junk, broken plates, old linens, rusted tools. Everything felt abandoned, untouched for years. I ran my hand along surfaces, felt the dust coat my skin, smelled the old fibers. My nose started to run. My eyes felt dry. As evening came again, I felt tense. I tried to eat a bit. My throat was dry. I forced down a can of beans and some water. I paced around the living room. The floor creaked with each step. I decided to confront the sounds. I decided I would stand in the dark and wait. When darkness fell, I turned off the flashlight and stood in the hallway. The darkness was complete, except for a weak moonlight through a dirty window. My palms were sweaty. My chest felt tight. My mind raced, but I tried to stay calm. I waited for a long time. Eventually, I heard it again. Footsteps on the second floor. They were slow, deliberate. I listened carefully. They moved from one room to another. They stopped. I moved silently up the stairs. I kept my body close to the wall. I tried to breathe through my nose, slow and steady. I reached the top of the stairs and looked down the hallway. It was empty. The footsteps came from the far end. I approached quietly. Suddenly, a door slammed shut. I jumped. My heart pounded. I shone the flashlight. All doors were closed. I tried one door. It opened without resistance. I tried another. It stuck. I tried a third. They all seemed normal. No sign of what caused the slam. I backed away, returning to my room. I locked the door, lay down, and gripped the flashlight. I kept my eyes open for a long time. My legs felt tense. My shoulders ached. I could not rest. But after hours, I finally drifted off. I woke up to silence. I felt a pain in my back from lying on the hard floor. I got up, unlocked the door, and stepped into the hallway. In the morning light, everything looked the same. Dust, old wood, and peeling wallpaper. I decided to check the attic. I found a hatch in the hallway ceiling, pulled it down, and climbed the ladder. The attic smelled like old insulation and musty fabric. I coughed. I shone the flashlight around. I saw stacks of crates, some trunks, a few broken chairs. The air was stale. I felt sweat on my forehead. My muscles felt tight. My breathing was shallow. I opened a trunk. It contained old clothing that fell apart in my hands. Another box had newspapers so old they crumbled at my touch. I found nothing useful. I listened. Nothing. No steps here. I climbed down and closed the hatch. Back in the upstairs hallway, I stopped in front of a large portrait. It showed an older man in a black suit. His eyes seemed to follow me just like the others. His face was stern. I stared back. I heard a soft click behind me. I spun around. The door to a small bedroom was now slightly open. I remembered closing it earlier. I walked over and pushed it open. The room was empty. No furniture, just dust and a cracked window. I stepped inside and felt a slight breeze from the window's gap. The air was cooler here. I turned around and saw that the hallway behind me was empty. I felt a chill on my neck as if someone watched me from behind. I jerked my head to look, but there was no one. I spent the rest of the afternoon exploring more rooms. I found an old bathroom with stained tiles and a rusted sink. The faucets did not work. The pipes made a dull clank when I turned the handle. Water did not come out. I found a small closet full of old coats and hats. They smelled like mold. I found a locked door at the end of a corridor. I tried kicking it, but it did not open. I tried using a metal tool from the kitchen to pry the lock. It took a while, but I finally forced the lock. Inside was a tiny storage room with nothing inside but a broken chair leg and dust. I sneezed. As evening came, I felt dread. My stomach was in a knot. I tried to light a candle. I had found some old candles in a drawer. The candlelight flickered, making the shadows move. I sat in the living room again, facing the entrance hall. I waited. The house was silent for a long time. Then I heard a distinct creak near the front door. I stood up and walked slowly to the entrance. I shone the flashlight around. Everything was still. I put my ear to the door. Nothing. I walked back, and as I did, I heard steps upstairs again. This time they were faster. I hurried to the staircase and looked up. I saw nothing. The steps moved overhead, as if walking along the length of the hallway. They stopped, then started again. They passed over my head, then stopped again. My breathing was loud in my ears. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. I decided to run upstairs and confront it. I ran up the steps, taking them two at a time. At the top, the hallway was empty. All doors were closed. I opened them one by one, checking inside each room. Empty, dusty, silent. I felt sweat running down my back. My heart was racing. I stood in the center of the hallway, listening. Nothing. I closed the doors and went back downstairs. I felt shaky. My legs felt weak. I sat on the floor. I tried to steady my breathing. The silence pressed in. I thought about leaving. I had the option. The front door was right there. But I had inherited this place. It was mine. I could not just run. I forced myself to stay. The next morning, I decided to clean a bit. Maybe I could make the place feel more normal. I found some old rags and a broom in a closet. I swept the dust in the living room. I wiped surfaces. The dust rose and made me sneeze. My eyes watered. I tried to open a window. The frame stuck. I pushed until it finally opened with a screech. Fresh air came in. It smelled like wet leaves outside. I felt relieved. While cleaning, I heard a soft thump in the corner. I turned around. A picture frame had fallen from a shelf. I walked over to pick it up. It was just an empty frame. I set it back. As I did, I heard another soft sound behind me. I turned quickly, shining the flashlight. Nothing moved. I went back to cleaning. I did not relax for a second. My muscles felt tight the whole time. I decided to check the basement. I returned to the small door near the kitchen. This time I would go down the stone steps. I held the flashlight in one hand and a long metal pipe in the other. The steps were cold. I felt moisture on the stone. The basement smelled like earth and decaying wood. My breathing echoed. I reached the bottom. The floor was dirt. The walls were stone. There were shelves with empty jars. I ran the light around. I saw a shape in the corner. I stepped closer. It was just a pile of cloth and a broken stool. Nothing else. I listened. The basement was quiet. My footsteps sounded dull on the dirt. I climbed back up. That night, I tried to sleep in my makeshift bedroom again. I locked the door. I lay on my sleeping bag and stared at the ceiling. I counted my breaths. After a while, I heard steps again. Not heavy, but firm. They crossed the hallway, paused, moved away, and then came back. I felt sweat on my forehead. I tightened my jaw. I waited. The steps approached my door. They stopped right outside. I listened, holding my breath. Then they moved on down the hallway. I heard a door creak. I heard a soft thud. Then silence. I could not sleep for a long time. In the morning, I woke up feeling sore. I opened the door. The hallway looked the same. Dust, old paint, no footprints. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the wood was expanding, maybe animals. But the steps had rhythm. They sounded like shoes on wood. I walked around checking each room. I found nothing new. I decided to move my things downstairs. I dragged my sleeping bag to the living room. I would sleep there. I felt less trapped on the first floor. I checked the front door. It opened fine. I locked it from inside again. I tested the windows. They were all shut, except the one I forced open for fresh air. I closed it now. The house was silent. I waited for night again. It came slowly. The shadows grew longer. I sat on the sofa, flashlight on my lap, pipe in my hand. I listened. After hours, the footsteps started upstairs. I stood up and walked to the staircase. I did not climb this time. I just stood at the bottom, shining the light up. The steps moved back and forth. I said nothing. I just watched the empty space. The sound continued, steady. It went from one end of the hallway to the other. No shape, no figure, nothing I could see. Just the sound of careful, intentional steps. My chest tightened. My throat felt dry. I stayed there until the steps stopped. Then I backed away into the living room and sat down again. I stayed in this house for several days. The pattern repeated. During the day, silence and dust. At night, footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes a door slammed. Sometimes a thump came from upstairs. Sometimes a portrait fell. I never found a person or any sign of one. I checked every room more than once. There was nothing. Yet the sounds continued. My nerves felt raw. My head ached. My hands shook sometimes. My mouth felt dry and my stomach cramped. I tried to ignore it. I tried to remain calm, but my body reacted. My heart raced each time darkness fell. Each time I heard the footsteps, I felt my skin prickle. I swallowed hard. I gripped the flashlight until my knuckles hurt. I did not sleep well. I woke up sore and tired every morning, but I stayed. I did not run. I had inherited this place. It was mine. I repeated that to myself. The house offered no comfort, no warmth, only silence, dust, and these sounds at night. The footsteps never showed themselves. I never felt a hand on my shoulder or a breath on my neck. Only the steady creaking of the floorboards and doors that opened or closed on their own. This went on. I became used to it in a way. I walked through the house each morning, checking each room. I found nothing changed except maybe a door was now open when I left it closed, or a portrait slightly tilted. I fixed what I could, moved on, and waited for the next night. The footsteps returned every time. After a week, I accepted it. The house was never empty. It tested me, forced me to listen, to watch, to wait. My body felt tense, my mind was exhausted, but I remained. I slept lightly, woke often, ate simple meals, paced the floors. No children, no neighbors, no visitors, no deaths. Just me in the house, And the footsteps, the quiet doors, the watchful eyes in the portraits, and the lingering smell of old wood and dust. I push open the heavy wooden door and step onto the first stone step. I hold a small oil lamp in my right hand. The flame flickers in a way that makes the shadows move along the cold walls. I smell mold and damp earth. My left hand touches the rough stones on the side as I descend. The steps are uneven. My shoes slip on a patch of slime at the edge of the third step, but I manage to steady myself without dropping the lamp. I feel my heartbeat increasing as I go deeper. The air feels thick and heavy, and I breathe in short, shallow bursts. I keep going, one step at a time. At the bottom, I reach a cramped corridor. The ceiling is low, so I have to lower my head a bit as I move forward. Ahead, I see rows of shelves made of dark wood. Each shelf holds stacks of thick, dusty volumes. The dust looks like a thin coat of gray powder. The spines of the books are cracked and faded. Some have old leather covers that look damp and swollen. Small puddles of water gather on the floor in places. I hear a slow drip in the distance. I do not see any source of light except my lamp. The flame is my only friend in here. I move between the shelves, trying to find the section I came here for. I know these books are rare, and I want to examine the ones mentioned in the museum's old records. I heard rumors that this basement was once sealed. I know that the staff above never mentioned these collections to the public. I want to see them for myself. I want to understand why these books are locked away down here. I hold the lamp up and see a wooden desk against the far wall. It has a few rolled scrolls on top. There is a wooden stool that looks worn and unsteady. I do not see any chairs with backs, just that stool. I approach it, moving slowly. The silence is total, except for the soft drip of water and my own careful steps. I set the lamp down on the desk. The flame steadies for a moment, then flickers again. I feel the dryness in my throat. I clear it softly, trying not to make too much noise. I see several shelves filled with thick folios. The bindings have symbols I do not recognize. Some have no titles at all. Others have small metal clasps holding them shut. I run my finger along one shelf, wiping dust away. My fingertip comes back grimy. I rub it against my jacket. The smell here is stale, like a closed cellar that has never seen fresh air. I feel the humidity clinging to my clothes and skin. My forehead is damp with sweat. As I lean closer to one shelf, I hear something that makes me pause. It sounds like a soft whisper. I cannot make out words. It is more like a faint, breathy sound, as if someone exhales near my ear. I turn around quickly, holding the lamp up. Nothing moves. I see only shelves and shadows. I step back toward the desk and try to focus. I tell myself I must have imagined it. But I hear it again. This time it seems to come from somewhere behind the shelves, as if someone stands just out of sight. The voice is low. I cannot identify the language. It does not sound like any language I know. It sounds uneven with a strange rhythm. I approach the corner where I think the sound is coming from. I move around a large shelf and find another narrow passage with more shelves. The lamp's light does not reach very far, and the darkness at the end of this corridor is thick. I hold the lamp out and try to look down. It is silent now. Only my breathing and the drip of water. I stand still, listening. Then I hear a gentle rustling. It reminds me of pages turning. I see nothing in front of me that moves. The shelves are still. I move the lamp closer to the books. I see one thick volume lying open on a lower shelf. Its pages shift slightly, as if moved by a small draft, but I feel no breeze. The pages turn once, slowly, then stop. I step back. My heart is beating harder now. I whisper to myself that it could be a trick of air currents. Maybe my own movement stirred the air. I lean closer to examine the book. The text inside is handwritten in a script I do not recognize. The letters are small and tight. The ink is faded brown. I try to read it, but I cannot decode the letters. They look strange and unnatural. I feel a knot in my stomach. I step away and return to the main area by the desk. I decide to light another candle to get more light. There is a small bundle of candles in a drawer under the desk. I strike a match on the rough edge of the desk and light one candle, then another. I place them around me on the desk and on the nearest shelf. The extra light does not comfort me. The darkness beyond the candles looks even blacker now. The flame makes shadows dance on the walls. I see shapes I cannot identify. My eyes strain to find something recognizable. I smell the faint odor of burning wick, mixing with the damp smell of the basement. As I stand by the desk, I hear another whisper. This time it sounds closer, behind me. I turn and see nothing. I walk to the shelf behind me and run my hand along the wood, feeling for any gaps. I see only old books and scrolls. I swallow hard and feel my throat tighten. My hands are damp with sweat, and I wipe them on my pants. I tell myself to stay calm. Suddenly I hear a soft thud. I turn back to the desk and see one of the scrolls rolled off and fell onto the floor. I kneel and pick it up. The parchment is old and cracked, and the writing on it looks like some form of code. The letters are arranged in columns, each line separated by small circles. I do not understand any of it. I set it back on the desk. A moment later, another scroll drops onto the floor by my feet. I pick it up quickly and place it back. My hand shakes a little. I notice that some papers and old parchment scraps are scattered near the base of another shelf. I walk over and pick one up. It has a series of strange markings that I cannot read. The ink looks fresh, darker and shinier than the ink in the old books. I rub my thumb over it, and it smudges slightly. I get a feeling that someone just placed these papers here not long ago. I look around, but I see no one. I back away toward the desk, keeping my eyes on the shelves. When I reach for another candle, I realize the flame in the lamp has grown weaker. I try to adjust the wick, but it flickers again. I feel a slight draft now, a gentle movement of air. I look up at the ceiling. I see small cracks and dripping water. I hear the water hitting the stones. I try to focus on that sound to calm myself. Then I feel something brush against my shoulder. I spin around and see nothing. My skin tingles where I felt the touch. It felt like fingers tapping lightly on my shirt. I walk backward, holding the lamp in front of me. My breathing is fast. My chest feels tight. The silence presses on my ears. Then I hear something on my left, a scraping sound. I step toward it and see a book tilted on its shelf. As I watch, the book pushes outward and falls to the ground. It makes a dull sound on the stone floor. I pick it up carefully and open it. Inside, the pages are blank. I flip through them, and I see empty pages all the same. I do not know why a blank book would be here. I close it and place it back on the shelf. My hands tremble. I feel a drop of sweat roll down the side of my face. I wipe it away. I whisper to myself that I should stay focused. I need to find the rare folios that brought me here. I check the labels on the shelves, but many have no labels at all. I notice a cluster of thick volumes on a lower shelf near the desk. They are bound in dark leather. I kneel and pull one off the shelf. It is heavy. I open it on the floor. The pages are filled with diagrams and charts. I see symbols that resemble letters, but I cannot read them. Some pages have drawings of plants and roots. Others show shapes that might be tools or artifacts. I run my finger over the ink. It feels slightly raised. The smell of old paper fills my nose. As I look at these pages, I hear more whispers. They grow louder, as if several voices speak at once. I feel my ears ringing. I close the book and put it back. The whispers fade a little. I think the voices are responding to what I do. They seem to react when I pick up certain books. I test this by touching another volume. This time a low groan echoes from behind the shelves. I jerk my hand back. I realize I might not be alone down here. I do not see anyone, but I feel a presence. I feel eyes on me, watching from the darkness. I swallow and consider leaving. But I have come this far. I want to see if I can find something useful. I decide to light more candles. I take out several and place them along the shelves. Each time I light one, the flame flares up bright, then settles. The extra light shows me more of the space. I see that the basement extends farther than I thought. There are more shelves behind a half-collapsed wall. The bricks there look loose. I hesitate to go there. I walk slowly down another aisle, holding the lamp low to avoid slipping on the wet floor. I see a pile of old rugs in a corner, stacked on top of each other. They look moldy. I poke one with my foot and a small cloud of dust rises. I notice tiny scraps of parchment hidden underneath them. I crouch down and lift one rug with my free hand. Underneath, I find a small stack of loose pages wrapped in twine. I set the lamp down and carefully untie the twine. The pages show more strange text and a few rough sketches of faces. These faces are drawn with shaky lines. The eyes are large and dark. They look like hurried sketches. I do not know who drew them. I feel uneasy looking at them. A sudden noise makes me jolt. It sounds like a shelf creaking. I stand up, grabbing the lamp. The noise comes again, a slow, wood-on-wood sound. I walk toward it, moving past the desk. I see a tall shelf swaying slightly. None of the others move. I stand a few feet away and watch. The shelf rocks forward an inch, then stops. I step closer, and it rocks again, then back. I feel a rush of panic. I reach out and touch the shelf. It is solid. It should not move like that. As soon as I remove my hand, it tilts forward again. A single book slides off and lands at my feet. I pick it up and open it. Inside is a short message scrawled in a language I cannot read. The letters are rough and uneven. I feel a sudden headache as I stare at them. I slam the book shut. I place the book on the desk and back away. The whispers return, louder now. I hear something moving near the far wall. I grab one of the candles and hold it up. In the corner, I see a stack of papers shifting as if pushed by an unseen hand. They slide across the floor. I walk toward them. They move again, making a soft scraping noise. I bend down and pick them up. The top sheet has a series of marks that look like arrows and circles. I cannot make sense of them. I drop the papers and step back. I feel sweat running down my spine. My stomach is tight. My hands feel numb. I grip the lamp handle harder. I notice my heart pounding. My breathing is fast. I decide I need to leave. I do not know what is happening and I feel unsafe. I start walking back toward the stone stairs. As I pass the shelves, I see that some books have changed position. I remember their order. Now it is different. I keep walking, not stopping to check further. Halfway to the stairs, I feel the floor under my foot move slightly. I look down and see a loose stone. I step around it carefully. I do not want to trip. The whispers follow me. I do not see anyone. I do not feel any touch now, but I sense something close behind me. I refuse to turn around. I focus on the stairs. They are just ahead. I see the faint outline of the doorway at the top. I climb slowly, keeping the lamp close to the steps so I do not slip. I do not look back. The whispers continue, but they fade as I climb. I hear them change pitch, growing softer. When I reach the top, I open the door and step through. I close it firmly behind me. My hand is shaking so much that I struggle with the latch. Back upstairs, I stand for a moment in the corridor of the museum. The air is drier here. It smells of old wood and distant polish. I breathe deeply. My clothes feel damp. My shoes squeak slightly as I walk. I leave the corridor and move toward a brighter room. The tension in my chest releases a bit. I wipe my forehead and feel my shirt sticking to my back. I do not know what those books are or why they behave that way. I do not know who whispered or who moved those objects. I only know what I saw and heard. I will not return there tonight. I still hold the lamp, and its flame is steady now. I walk down the hall, away from that basement and its shelves. I feel the cool air of the upper floors. My heartbeat slows down. I do not plan to share what I found. I do not think anyone would believe me. I will remember those whispers and those pages turning on their own. I will remember the feeling of being watched. For now, I will keep this to myself. I remember stepping into that old hotel's lobby on my first evening. I was tired from a long trip, my head aching from hours of cramped travel. I approached the check-in desk and waited while the clerk looked for my reservation. The reception area smelled of dust and old furniture polish. There was no one else there. The lights were dim. The man behind the desk gave me a single key attached to a heavy brass keychain. He spoke in a low voice, told me my room number, and pointed me toward a hallway. I walked through a narrow corridor with faded wallpaper and small framed paintings. The carpet under my shoes felt thin and worn. I carried a single suitcase and a laptop bag. I found my room at the end of the hall, a door with peeling paint and a loose handle. I turned the key, stepped inside, and closed the door behind me. The room was larger than I expected. The bed was wide with a high wooden headboard. The curtains were thick and heavy, a dull shade of red. The windows overlooked a small courtyard with a single street lamp. The furniture looked old and heavy, with carved details and chipped edges. On the left side, near the entrance, there was a tall, narrow mirror mounted on the wall. Its frame had gold accents and dark cracks in the wood. The glass looked clear at first glance, but the surface had tiny imperfections, like bubbles or scratches. I noticed it as soon as I entered because it stood directly on my path toward the main part of the room. I stopped in front of it without meaning to. I could see my reflection from head to toe. As I stood there, I noticed something odd. My face in the mirror looked strange. I wasn't making any unusual expression, but my reflection's mouth seemed twisted, as if it were opening slightly and closing again without producing any sound. I moved my jaw and lips to check if I was doing that. I wasn't. My face in real life felt neutral, but in the mirror my reflection's features were distorted. My forehead looked tense and my cheeks looked tight, as if I were in pain. I frowned, lifted my hand, and ran my fingers over my face, pressing my skin. It felt normal, but in the mirror my expression looked strained. It made no sense. I stood there a moment longer, then shook my head and walked deeper into the room. I opened my suitcase, unpacked a few things, tried to settle in. The air felt musty. The temperature was a bit cool, so I turned on the small radiator in the corner. The radiator rattled, making a hollow metallic sound. I decided to take a shower, hoping a hot bath would help me relax after the long day. The bathroom was cramped with old tiles and a mirror above the sink. This mirror reflected me normally. No strange faces. My eyes looked tired, but that was expected. I took my shower and dried off. When I stepped back into the main room, I glanced at the corridor mirror again. I saw myself walk past it. This time my reflection's eyes seemed a bit off, as if looking at something behind me, but I refused to focus on that. I tried to ignore it. That night I slept restlessly. I heard creaking noises from the wooden floor. I couldn't tell if the sounds came from nearby rooms or from somewhere inside my own walls. The sound was soft but persistent. At one point, in the early hours, I woke up shivering. The radiator was still on, but the room felt colder than before. I got up to check the window. It was closed and locked. I looked at the mirror in the corridor. I couldn't see my reflection clearly from the bed, but I thought I saw movement in the glass. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe a passing car outside. I went back to bed and pulled the blanket tighter. The next morning, I went downstairs for breakfast. The hotel's dining area had a few small tables and a weak buffet selection. Some bread, ham, cheese, and lukewarm coffee. I ate quickly and returned to my room to grab my laptop. I had meetings all day. Before leaving, I dared a quick glance at the mirror. My reflection showed my tie crooked and my hair slightly out of place. That seemed normal. I adjusted my tie, fixed my hair, and left, relieved that maybe the weirdness was just in my head the previous night. All day I sat through long meetings in a nearby office building. I was distracted, thinking of the mirror. I felt silly about it. I was just tired, maybe. When I finally got back to the hotel, it was late. The corridors were quiet and dimly lit. I let myself into my room and flipped on the lights. I looked around slowly. Everything seemed ordinary. The bed was made, my suitcase rested on a stand by the window, and the radiator was off. I walked up to the mirror and stared at it again. I raised my hand and touched the glass. It felt cold, much colder than the surrounding air. The reflection looked normal at first. I moved from side to side and watched the angle of the reflection change. After a few minutes, I noticed a faint discoloration in the corner of the glass, as if a dark shape stood just out of sight. I leaned closer. The surface of the mirror felt smooth, but the image looked slightly off. I saw the corner of a dark hood, like someone standing behind me, but there was no one there when I turned around. The room behind me was empty and still. I backed away and rubbed my eyes. When I looked at the mirror again, the hooded shape was gone. I felt tense. I decided to ignore it. I unpacked some documents, checked emails, and tried to focus on work. After a while, I climbed into bed. I turned off the lights. I heard a faint sound like muffled laughter coming from the direction of the mirror. I sat up, turned on the bedside lamp, and listened carefully. The laughter stopped. My heart was beating hard. I stood up, walked to the door, and placed my ear close to the mirror's frame. Nothing. The silence was total. I went back to bed and forced myself to sleep. It was not easy. I felt my skin prickling. My breathing was shallow. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard something. Eventually, I drifted off. The next morning, I felt drained. I got ready quickly. I avoided looking directly at the mirror. I went to work, did my duties, and ate lunch at a nearby cafe. I stayed away from the hotel until late afternoon. When I returned, I found my room even colder. I adjusted the radiator, but it made only a slight difference. The mirror looked the same at first glance. I decided to inspect it carefully. I turned on all the lights. I stood in front of it and watched. After a few minutes, the reflection's version of my face began to shift again. My mouth in the reflection opened slightly. The corners of my lips pulled back, exposing my teeth. I was not moving my mouth at all. I ran my tongue over my teeth. They felt normal. The reflection's teeth looked yellowed and worn. I jerked backward, stumbled, and nearly fell. I caught my balance and turned away. When I looked back, my reflection was normal again. I felt a chill on my neck. The air in the room felt heavier. I smelled something stale, like old laundry. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I turned off the lamp. In the darkness, I could see a faint glow from the street lamp outside filtering through the curtains. My eyes adjusted to the low light. That was when I heard soft laughter again, this time clearer. It came from the mirror's direction. I bolted upright and turned on the lamp. The laughter stopped. I stood and approached the mirror, keeping a few feet of distance. I saw my reflection standing there, expression blank. Suddenly, in the reflection, I saw a hooded figure slide into view just behind my shoulder. I turned around fast. There was no one there. In the mirror, though, I saw that figure again. Its head was covered by a dark hood. I could not see its face. It stood motionless. I turned around once more. Still nothing behind me. I began to sweat. My heart pounded so hard I could hear my pulse. I reached out and tapped the mirror lightly with my fingertip. The figure did not move. My reflection still looked normal, but my reflection's eyes were fixed on me, not on the figure. I started breathing hard. I left the room and walked down the hall. I found the night clerk at the reception desk and asked him if he had ever had complaints about strange noises in the rooms. He said he had not. He asked if I wanted another room. I hesitated, but I said no. I told him I was tired and probably just imagining things. I walked back to my room and locked the door. I stood in front of the mirror again. The figure was not there now, and my reflection showed no distortion. I climbed into bed feeling uneasy and finally fell asleep after a long time. The next morning, I woke up shivering. The radiator had stopped working at some point during the night. I checked it. The knob moved, but no warmth came. I decided to let it go and finish my business trip as soon as possible. I planned to leave in 2 days. Until then, I had to deal with this situation. I tried to focus on my routine. I shaved and dressed in front of the bathroom mirror. My face looked normal there. Only the big mirror in the corridor bothered me. Before leaving for my meetings, I covered that big mirror with a spare blanket. I pinned the blanket's corners under the frame. I did not want to see that reflection again. I left the room feeling more relaxed, as if I had solved a problem. When I came back that evening, the room was freezing. I could see my breath in the air. The blanket covering the mirror was on the floor. The pins lay scattered. I looked around for an open window or a gap in the wall. I found nothing. The radiator was on but did not produce any heat. I stood there, unsure what to do. I picked up the blanket and tried to cover the mirror again. As I did, I noticed the reflection's version of me. My reflection looked furious. Its eyebrows were pulled down and its eyes were narrowed. Its lips were pressed together. I was not making that face. I was breathing through parted lips, nervous and uncertain. But the reflection looked angry, like it hated me. I saw the hooded figure again in the corner of the glass. It seemed to be closer this time. I yanked the blanket over the mirror. The last thing I saw before the glass was covered was my reflection's head tilting slightly, as if it were watching me closely. I pulled a chair over and sat down facing the covered mirror. I listened. I heard soft breathing sounds. I heard faint laughter. I heard scratching noises. The room kept getting colder. I pulled my jacket on and rubbed my hands together. My heart was racing. I felt trapped. I tried calling the front desk on the room's phone. I wanted someone to check the radiator or help me move to another room. The line was dead. There was no dial tone. I checked my cell phone. The signal was weak. I managed to send a single text to a colleague telling him I might leave the hotel early. I did not explain why. I just wanted to know I had a way out in the morning. I decided to sleep with the lamp on. I settled into bed, facing away from the covered mirror. After a while, I heard a soft rustling sound. The blanket was moving. I dared not look. I closed my eyes tight. My breathing was shallow. I clenched my fists. After a few minutes, I turned my head slightly. The blanket was sliding down, slowly, as if pulled from behind. I watched it drop to the floor. The mirror was uncovered again. I sat up and looked directly at it. I saw the hooded figure filling more of the reflection now. It stood right behind my reflection's shoulder, a few inches away. My reflection stared at me with rage. Its teeth were visible, clenched. Its eyes seemed to flicker. I leaned forward, my forehead damp with sweat. My throat felt tight. I wanted to get out of that room. I reached for my suitcase, kept my eyes on the mirror, and started packing. As I threw my clothes into the bag, I saw the figure raise a hand inside the reflection. It pressed its hand against the glass from the inside. I heard a faint tapping sound. I zipped my suitcase and approached the door. The door would not open. The key worked. I turned the knob, but it felt stuck. I pulled harder until it gave way. I stumbled into the hallway. I closed the door behind me. For a moment, I considered leaving right then and there. It was late, maybe past midnight. The hallway was silent and dark. The sconces on the wall were lit with low bulbs. I walked to the stairwell and checked the lobby. It was empty. The door to the street was locked. I checked my watch. It was too late to find another hotel. I decided I would stay in the lobby until morning. I dragged my suitcase to a sofa and sat down, staring at the front door. After about an hour, I realized I had forgotten important documents in my room. I needed them for the next day's meeting. I felt uneasy, but I stood up and forced myself to go back upstairs. The hallway felt colder now. My teeth chattered. I reached my door. It was slightly ajar. I had closed it before. I pushed it open, afraid of what I might see. The mirror stood uncovered. The hooded figure pressed its face against the glass. I saw a pale chin under the hood. Its mouth was twisted into a strange grin. My reflection looked furious as before. The figure tapped the glass again. I heard a cracking sound, faint but distinct. I rushed in, grabbed my documents from the desk, and backed away. The reflection tracked my every move. I saw the glass surface bulge slightly, as if under pressure. I did not want to see what would happen if it broke. I turned off all the lights, hoping darkness would calm things down. I stood at the door, my bag over my shoulder, and watched. In the dim light from the window, the mirror's surface was dark. I could still see my reflection's outline. Its shoulders were hunched. The hooded figure seemed to loom behind it. I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door closed. I did not care if it locked. I hurried downstairs and sat in the lobby for the rest of the night. In the morning, I checked out early. The clerk did not ask why. I left the hotel and took a taxi to another place. I did not look back at the facade of that old building. I tried to think about normal things. I focused on finishing my work and leaving town. I never told anyone about that mirror. I do not know what was behind it. I only know how it felt to see my own face twisted into something it was not, how it felt to see that hooded figure pushing forward, tapping at the glass, threatening to break through. I have not seen anything like that since, but I remember the sounds, the cold, the laughter, and the way the reflection hated me for reasons I cannot explain. I just know I never want to return to that hotel. I was about halfway through a long drive on a quiet, empty highway. There were no other cars around. The sky was dark, and I could only see what my headlights revealed. The asphalt stretched ahead like an endless black line. I had been driving for hours without stopping. I felt stiff and a little anxious. I wanted to get somewhere safe and familiar, maybe a cheap motel or a gas station with some lights, but nothing was ahead, just more darkness. I noticed the engine making a strange sound. It was a faint knocking noise coming from beneath the hood. At first, I tried to ignore it. I turned on the radio to distract myself. I got mostly static. No music, no clear station, just that crackling sound. I twisted the dial left and right. At one point, there was a burst of odd laughter and then some words I couldn't make out. I tried to tune it again, but the station was gone. Just the hiss and pop of static remained. A few minutes later, the engine noise got worse. It rattled, then coughed, and then the car began to lose speed. I pressed the gas pedal harder. Nothing changed. The car slowed down until I had to pull over. I eased onto the shoulder and switched on my hazard lights. There was no one coming in either direction, but I still felt the need to mark my spot, as if someone might appear out of nowhere and slam into me. The engine died completely. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, feeling my heart beating harder. I didn't like being stuck out here. The night was silent, and the radio still produced static. I shut it off to clear my head, but that felt worse. Total silence bothered me even more, so I clicked the radio on again. The static returned, but at least it was something. I tried the ignition once. The engine cranked but didn't start. I tried again. Same thing. I popped the hood release and stepped out of the car. The air was cold. My breath formed small clouds as I walked around to the front. I pulled up the hood and aimed my flashlight inside. I'm not a mechanic, but I know a few things. The belts looked intact. The hoses were all connected. I checked the battery terminals. They were tight. Nothing obvious jumped out at me. I closed the hood and stood there, listening to the ticking of cooling metal. The highway was silent except for a faint breeze. My eyes struggled to see anything beyond the edge of the road. The beam of my flashlight showed only dry dirt and weeds. I felt uneasy. I didn't have a phone signal out here, and I hadn't seen a passing car in a long time. I walked back to the driver's side door and got in. I turned the key again. The engine tried but failed. The radio static changed when I did that. For a split second, I heard a voice. It sounded distant, like it was far away or buried under layers of interference. It spoke a few words I couldn't understand, then faded back into hissing. I tapped the radio, fiddled with the dial again. Nothing but that broken noise. I leaned my head against the headrest and took a slow breath. I tried to think calmly. Maybe if I waited a bit and tried again, the engine would catch. Maybe I flooded it or something simple like that. While I was sitting there, I became aware of a strange smell. It reminded me of old damp fabric. I checked the back seat, but everything looked normal. I smelled the vents, but the heater was off. I looked up at the rearview mirror out of habit. For a moment, I saw something standing behind the car. It was just a shape, like a tall figure. No clear details. I blinked and looked closer. It was still there. My heart started pounding. I turned around fast, twisting my body to look out the rear window. There was nothing there. The shoulder of the road was empty. Just darkness. When I turned back to the mirror, I saw nothing but the faint red glow of my own taillights against the ground. I tried to tell myself I was seeing things. The dark can play tricks. My eyes were tired. I faced forward again and tried the ignition. It made a weak, grinding sound. The radio crackled. I heard soft laughter coming through the speakers. It wasn't my laughter. It sounded like a man, but the tone was all wrong. It came in short bursts and then cut out. I turned the volume knob to 0, but the laughter stayed at the same level. It didn't go away. I pressed the power button. The radio clicked off. The laughter disappeared. I sat there in silence. My heart wouldn't slow down. I could feel my pulse in my neck. After a few seconds, I tried the car again. Without warning, the engine roared to life. The car shook. The headlights brightened the road ahead. I hadn't done anything different. I didn't even finish turning the key all the way. It just started on its own. I glanced at the dash. The RPMs were steady. No warning lights. It looked normal now. I reached for the radio. It was still off. I relaxed a little. I moved my hand to the gear shift, ready to put the car in drive and leave. Then I heard a whisper. It came from the speakers, even though the radio was off. At first I thought it was more static, but it formed my name. It said it slow and quiet. It sounded almost like my own voice saying my name back to me. I froze and stared at the dashboard. The whisper repeated my name a few times, then stopped. I pressed every button on the radio. I turned it on and off. I scanned stations. I tried to disconnect it by pulling at the knobs. Nothing changed. The whisper didn't return immediately. I put the car in drive and pulled forward slowly. The engine sounded normal again. The wheels rolled over the rough shoulder and back onto the smooth pavement. I tried to calm down. The car was moving. I could get out of here. I told myself to focus on that. I drove about a minute. The headlights lit up the empty road. I saw no signs, no buildings, nothing. The darkness pressed in from both sides. My shoulders were tense. My hands gripped the wheel too tight. I eased off a bit and cracked my neck. I looked in the mirror again, forcing myself to check. Nothing was behind me. No silhouette. Just an empty road. Suddenly, the radio emitted a soft click and turned itself on. Static poured out. I reached out and turned the volume all the way down, but it stayed the same volume. The static grew louder. It crackled, popped, and then a voice said a few words I couldn't catch. I listened carefully. It sounded like someone breathing heavily into a microphone. I could hear the rush of air. Then I heard my name again. It was faint and drawn out. The voice stretched it, then laughed in short bursts. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I tried to ignore it. I focused on driving. The car felt fine now. The only problem was the radio. I considered pulling over and yanking the fuse, but I didn't want to stop again. I wanted to get out of this empty stretch. I wanted to find any sign of other people. A gas station, a diner, even a closed shop with a payphone outside. Anything. The radio kept whispering my name. It repeated it with different tones. Sometimes it sounded like a question, sometimes like a command. I tried turning it off again, but the power button did nothing. I tapped the screen and knobs. No response. The voice was calm, not hurried, not angry, just slow and deliberate. I rolled down the window. Cold air rushed in. I felt it on my face. It cleared my head a bit. The smell from before was gone. Just fresh air now. The wind hissed against the frame of the car. The voice kept going. I thought maybe I could drown it out by playing with the balance or fade controls, but nothing worked. The voice didn't change. It was as if the radio controls were fake. I gritted my teeth. "Who's there?" I said out loud, feeling stupid immediately. There was no one who could answer. The radio static hissed. The whisper stopped. I waited, my eyes shifting between the road and the dashboard. The highway was still empty. The radio remained silent for a while. Only static. I felt a small bit of relief. Then something tapped on the rear passenger window. I heard a short, sharp knock like a fingertip on glass. I turned my head slightly and glanced in the rearview mirror. I saw nothing. I checked the side mirror. Nothing. I slowed down a bit. My heart raced. The knock sounded real. I gripped the wheel and tried to breathe slowly. Maybe a rock kicked up by the tires. Maybe something fell in the back seat and hit the door. I glanced over my shoulder. The back seat was empty, just a jacket and an old paper bag. They weren't moving. I pressed the gas pedal and sped up. The engine hummed steadily. The headlights cut through the darkness. I kept checking the mirrors. At one point, I thought I saw movement on the side of the road, something disappearing behind the beam of light as I passed. I didn't stop. I kept going. The radio clicked again. The voice returned, repeating my name. This time it sounded closer, like it was coming from right beside me. I looked at the passenger seat. Empty. Just the worn fabric and a few receipts on the floor. I listened carefully. The voice said my name twice, and then breathed heavily. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. I pressed the radio power button harder, but it did nothing. I even tried to turn the car stereo off at the fuse box under the steering wheel, but I couldn't do that while driving. I thought about pulling over, but I was afraid of stopping again. I decided to talk to it. "What do you want?" I said quietly. The voice didn't answer. The static hissed. I heard some faint words that made no sense. It sounded like random syllables. Then laughter again. That same short burst of laughter that had no warmth or humor, just a dry sound. I kept driving. The road showed no signs of ending. The speedometer read a steady 55 miles per hour. My fuel gauge was still okay. I had over half a tank. I considered turning around, but something about going back felt wrong. I stuck to my direction. I told myself that eventually I would find a rest stop or a town. The tapping sound returned. This time it came from the roof. A soft but distinct tap, tap, tap. I felt my muscles tighten. I tried not to look up because I couldn't see anything through the roof, but it bothered me. The taps sounded too controlled to be random debris. They were spaced out like someone was testing the metal. I gripped the wheel and just kept going, hoping it would stop. It did after about 5 taps. After a few miles, the headlights caught a shape on the side of the road. It looked like a car parked on the shoulder. I couldn't see the color or make, just the outline of a vehicle. I slowed down, thinking maybe I could ask someone for help. As I got closer, I realized the car had no lights on. It was just sitting there, dark and still. I passed it slowly. I tried to see if anyone was inside, but I only got a quick glimpse of empty windows. It looked abandoned. I didn't stop. The radio voice rose in volume. It said my name at a normal speaking level now, like someone sitting in the passenger seat. I tried not to look. I bit my lip. I felt sweat on my forehead. The voice said my name over and over. It didn't sound angry, just persistent. I reached out and tried to unplug the radio unit. I felt behind the dashboard, pulling at wires. I couldn't find a quick release. The voice didn't react to me touching the wires. It kept going. After several minutes, I saw a sign. It was a bent metal sign by the roadside. My headlights revealed the word exit and an arrow. Finally, maybe a way out. I followed the arrow. The ramp led off the highway and onto a smaller, rougher road. The radio voice got quieter, but it was still there. It said my name less often. Mostly it whispered and breathed. I kept one hand on the wheel and one near my flashlight on the passenger seat. I drove for a while on that smaller road. I saw trees now, their branches extending overhead. My headlights illuminated trunks and leaves. The tapping sound came back, this time on the rear window. I glanced back and saw a smudge on the glass like a handprint. I almost shouted out loud. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded a little and I stopped in the middle of this narrow road. My heart pounded. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it at the back seat. Empty. No one there. I leaned over and wiped at the rear window with my sleeve. On the inside, it was clean. The smudge was on the outside. I rolled down the window, stuck my arm out and felt the glass. Smooth and cold. No mark. I rolled the window up again. The radio hissed, and the voice said, "Don't leave." Just those two words in a low whisper. I froze. My stomach felt tight. I put the car in gear and pressed the gas. The tires rolled forward slowly. I kept my eyes on the road. I didn't respond. The voice said my name again, stretched and drawn out. It sounded calm, but insistent. I drove faster, ignoring the trees and the rough road. Eventually I saw lights ahead. Just a faint glow, maybe a gas station or a rest area. I pushed the car to get there. As I approached, I saw a small building with a couple of dim bulbs over a door and a single gas pump. Relief flooded my chest. I slowed down and stopped next to the pump. I turned off the engine. The headlights went dark. The radio shut off with the engine. The voice disappeared. I sat in silence, breathing hard. I looked around. The building had a closed sign. The lights were weak but stable. I could see bugs circling the bulbs. Nothing moved around me. No silhouettes, no tapping sounds. I sat there for a long time, just holding the wheel. My hands shook a little. I took slow breaths. Eventually, I decided to see if the radio worked normally now. I turned the key to accessory mode. The radio came on. Static. I turned the dial. I picked up a distant music station. Clear old rock music. No whispering voice, no laughter, just normal sound. I turned it off again. I didn't want to hear anything more from it. I sat in the car and watched the bugs fly around the lights. I listened to my breathing. My heartbeat slowed down to normal. After a while, I felt calmer. The strange presence, or whatever it was, seemed to be gone. I didn't know what happened out there on that highway. I didn't know why the radio acted like that, why I saw that silhouette, or why the tapping happened. I didn't know why the radio said my name. I didn't want to think about it too deeply. I just wanted to get back on the road, find a motel, and sleep. I started the engine again. The car responded normally. I pulled out of the small lot and got back on the road. The rest of the drive was quiet. I kept the radio off. My eyes stayed glued to the mirrors just in case. But I saw nothing unusual, just empty road and occasional signs. Eventually, I found a motel with a neon sign and a few cars parked outside. It looked worn, but it felt safe. I parked and stepped out. The night air felt fresher. I grabbed my bag and locked the car. I glanced inside one last time. Everything was quiet and still. I walked to the office. The old man at the desk greeted me casually. I got a room. I stayed awake for a long time in that small, stuffy room, just listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the buzzing of the neon outside. No voices, no tapping, no silhouettes. I never figured out what really happened. I never told anyone. I avoided that highway after that. I never wanted to hear that voice again. I kept the memory locked away and moved on, but I still remember the exact tone of that whisper saying my name and the feeling of not being alone in my own car. I remember looking in the mirror and seeing that shape. I remember the radio laughing. I remember the taps on the glass. I can't explain it. I don't want to. I'm just glad I left that place behind. I remember the day I found that chair. It happened about a month ago. I was visiting an antique shop on the outskirts of town. The place was quiet, and the owner let me wander around without bothering me. I saw old mirrors with dusty frames, chipped tables with missing drawers and worn carpets with strange patterns. Then I noticed a rocking chair tucked in a corner. It looked like it belonged to the 19th century. The wood had scratches and stains, and the seat's upholstery looked dirty and old. The armrests were smooth in places and rough in others, and one of the chair's legs had a tiny crack near the base. I don't know why I wanted it, but I did. I asked the price, and the owner told me it was cheap. He seemed glad to get rid of it. He wrapped it in some old blankets and helped me carry it to my car. I remember the weight and the feel of it as we pushed it into the trunk. It felt solid but not heavy. I drove home, brought it inside, and climbed the steps to my attic with the chair balanced on my shoulder. I almost slipped once but managed to keep my grip. My attic is a small space with wooden beams and a single window at the end. There's not much up there. I keep a few boxes and some old tools, but it's mostly empty. I placed the rocking chair near the window and stepped back to look at it. I wanted to see if it added something to the space. It looked fine. It fit that corner well. I left it there and went downstairs. That first night I was in bed trying to sleep. It was late, maybe after midnight. I heard a noise coming from above. It sounded like wood moving. I recognized it as the slow, uneven sound of a rocking chair moving back and forth. I lay there, listening. It was a clear, steady creak. I could picture the chair in my mind. I stayed in bed at first, hoping it was just the old floorboards contracting or something simple. But the noise kept going. I got up, turned on a light, and walked up the stairs. My heart was beating harder than normal. I wasn't scared yet, but I felt uneasy. The attic door creaked when I opened it. I stood on the threshold and aimed my flashlight around. The rocking chair was still near the window. It was not moving. The room was silent. I checked the window. It was closed and locked. There was no draft. The attic was warm, stale, and still. I stood there for a while, waiting, then turned and went back to bed. The next night I heard it again. The same creaking noise woke me up. This time I got up faster. I didn't waste time listening from bed. I climbed the stairs and pushed open the attic door. The chair was in the same spot, not moving. No sound. Nothing out of place. I approached it and touched the backrest. The wood felt cool and smooth. I pressed my hand against the seat. Nothing unusual. The upholstery felt rough under my fingertips. The fabric looked dirty and worn. I leaned in, trying to see if there was any sign of animals or insects. I didn't notice anything. I stared at the floor. It was dusty, but I saw no footprints or marks. I left the attic and went back to bed, confused. The following night I heard the sound again. This time it was louder. The creaking of the wood was more insistent. It woke me more suddenly. I felt a dull ache behind my eyes, probably from lack of sleep. I climbed the stairs again, breathing heavily. My throat felt dry. When I opened the attic door, the chair was still near the window facing out, but something felt different. I stepped closer. The chair seemed angled slightly. The front left leg looked a bit rotated. I couldn't be sure. I placed my palm on it and tried to rock it. It moved back and forth without trouble. I let go and watched it settle into stillness. I decided to inspect it more closely in the morning. The next day, I went up with a small lamp and a magnifying glass I keep for reading old inscriptions on antiques. I placed the lamp on a nearby box and leaned in. The upholstery was grimy with stains and irregular shapes. I saw small dark hairs stuck deep in the fabric. They were short and thin, not like animal fur. They looked human. It was unsettling. I pulled at one of the hairs and it came loose with a slight tug. I noticed more of them hidden in the folds of the seat. I pressed a finger against the wood on the armrest. The surface felt uneven. I tried to see better. There were small scratches and marks in the wood. Some of them formed strange shapes that I couldn't understand. They looked like random lines, but when I followed their pattern, I noticed a kind of repetition. I couldn't read them, but they looked intentional, like someone carved them a long time ago. I tried to convince myself that this was normal. It was an old piece. People used to mark their belongings. Maybe the previous owner had a habit of scratching symbols. The hair could belong to someone who sat there often. I told myself that this was not a big deal. That night I lay in bed and tried not to think about it. I failed. I couldn't stop picturing those hairs and marks. My mind kept drifting back to the way the chair seemed to face the window. I fell asleep late. I woke to the sound again. The rocking was louder now. It had a sharper, more grating quality. I felt my heart pounding as I sat up. I could feel sweat on my forehead and under my arms. I tried to stay calm, but I couldn't ignore it. I got out of bed and stood at the bottom of the attic stairs, listening. The chair was rocking. The sound was steady. I could hear the wooden legs scraping against the floor. It sounded like someone pushing it with a firm, consistent force. I climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier. At the top, I paused before opening the door. The sound was clear on the other side. I opened the door quickly and aimed my flashlight. The chair stopped moving the moment I looked at it. I caught a glimpse of the chair's backrest still swaying slightly, like something had been in motion seconds before. The air smelled stale. I walked over and looked down at the floor. There were faint curved lines in the dust as if the chair had moved a few inches. I stood there, trying to breathe slowly. I reached out and touched the chair. It felt warm this time. My hand jerked back. I pressed my palm against it again, harder, trying to sense something rational. It just felt like wood that had been rubbed. I couldn't explain the warmth. I checked the window. It was still locked. The glass was cool to the touch. I turned my attention back to the chair. It looked unchanged except for its position. It seemed to face slightly toward the door now, not the window. I didn't like the idea that it had turned toward me. I felt a tightness in my chest. I left the attic and shut the door behind me. The next morning I went upstairs again to examine the symbols. I took a notepad and a pen. I tried to copy the shapes. They were small and rough. Some looked like triangles or crosses with extra lines. Others were just scratches that overlapped. I counted about 10 distinct marks. I searched the rest of the chair for similar signs. I found a few more at the back of the seat and under one armrest. I ran my hand along the upholstery and felt grit. I pressed my fingers into the padding. It felt hard in some places. I wondered if something was inside the fabric. I tried to push the thoughts away as the day went on. In the afternoon, I considered moving the chair out of the attic, maybe placing it outside or in the garage. But I hesitated. I didn't have a good reason to explain what was happening. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the chair was just old and made strange noises. I thought about staying awake all night and filming it. I had a small camera and a tripod. Around midnight, I set up the camera near some boxes, aimed at the chair, and turned off the lights. I stayed hidden behind the half-open attic door, watching from a corner. At first, I heard nothing. About an hour passed, and I felt sleepy. Then I heard the rocking start again. The camera's red light was on, recording. I waited. The chair rocked slowly, the wood creaking. I peered through the gap in the door, trying to see if anything was pushing it. I saw no one. The attic was empty except for the chair, the boxes, and the camera. After a few minutes, the rocking got faster. The sound grew louder. I tightened my grip on the door frame. I didn't move. I felt cold sweat on my back. Then it stopped suddenly. The silence was heavy. I turned on the flashlight, stepped inside, and the chair was still. I approached it and looked down at the floor. There were fresh lines in the dust, and the chair was now angled toward the door again. I grabbed the camera and went downstairs, my heart still racing. I watched the footage on my computer. The chair was there, motionless for a long time. Then it began to rock. It moved back and forth with no visible cause. The seat dipped forward, then backward, and the legs scraped the floor. There was no one there. Just that old chair. At one point, it leaned slightly forward, as if looking toward the camera. Then it stopped. The camera didn't show anything else. I felt a heavy feeling in my stomach. I paced around the living room for a while, thinking about what to do. I didn't want to call anyone, I didn't want to sound crazy. I decided to move the chair to another room. I went upstairs around midday and picked it up. It felt heavier than before. I struggled to lift it. The wood seemed dense and the upholstery felt stiff. I carried it down 2 flights of stairs and into a spare room on the ground floor. I placed it near a wall and left it there. I turned the chair so it faced the wall, not the door. Then I locked the door to that room. That night I slept lightly. Around 2 in the morning I heard a noise downstairs. I sat up and listened. It was the same rocking sound. My body tensed. I got up and walked slowly down the hallway. I could hear the creaking. It was coming from the spare room. I had locked that door. I walked down the stairs, each step making my legs feel heavier. When I reached the spare room door, I pressed my ear against it. The chair was rocking inside. The floor creaked. I put my hand on the doorknob and hesitated. My heart was pounding and my mouth felt dry. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. I shined a flashlight in. The chair was facing me. It was not near the wall. It had moved about 3 feet forward. It was still. There was no one in the room. The window was shut and there was no draft. I gripped the doorknob tight, my knuckles stiff. I stepped closer and reached out to touch the chair. This time I felt something sticky on the armrest. I pulled my hand back and aimed the flashlight at it. There was a small clump of hair stuck under the armrest edge, embedded in old residue. My throat tightened. I took a piece of tissue from my pocket and tried to remove it. It resisted at first, then came loose. I dropped it on the floor and felt a chill on the back of my neck. I decided I had to get rid of the chair. I stepped back into the hallway and tried to calm down. My legs felt shaky. I walked to the kitchen and drank some water. I tried to think clearly. Tomorrow I would drive it to a junkyard or leave it at the antique shop where I got it. I went back upstairs to try to sleep. It took me a long time to drift off, and when I did, I kept waking up at every sound. In the morning, I went to the spare room. The chair was still facing the door. It looked the same, except now it seemed off-center by a few inches. I touched it carefully, feeling the rough wood on my fingertips. Nothing felt unusual except the tension in my chest. I grabbed it by the backrest and dragged it toward the door. It made a scraping sound on the floor. My hands were shaking. I hauled it through the hallway and out the front door. The sunlight felt harsh on my eyes. I carried it to my car and tried to fit it in the trunk. It barely fit. I pushed the trunk closed and got in the driver's seat. I had no idea where I was going. I just needed to get rid of it. I drove toward the antique shop. On the way, I kept looking in the rearview mirror. I couldn't see the chair from my seat, but I could imagine it there. The air in the car felt heavy, and I opened a window. When I reached the antique shop, I parked and got out. The owner's car was there, but I wasn't sure if he was open. I took the chair out of the trunk. I set it down on the sidewalk. I walked to the shop door and saw a note that said closed until late afternoon. I looked back at the chair. I decided to leave it there. I didn't care about a refund. I turned and walked back to my car, my heart still beating fast. I felt my shoulders tense. I got in the car and drove away. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if the chair was still there. That night, I slept better. The house was silent. I woke once, listening carefully, but I heard nothing. I got up, walked around, and checked every room. There was no rocking, no movement. The attic was empty except for some boxes and dust. The spare room was bare. I returned to bed. My body felt tired, but calm. It was over. I still felt uneasy, but at least I didn't have that chair anymore. It started when I walked into the building's lobby that night after work. I felt tired, and my legs ached from standing all day. The overhead lights were dim, as usual. The landlord never fixed the lighting. I stepped onto the stairs and climbed up to my floor. The building was old and the floors were uneven, so I kept my hand on the rail. I reached my floor after a few flights and I could feel my own breathing through my nose. The hallway was narrow and smelled of stale air. The paint on the walls always looked the same pale color, and the floor tiles were scuffed and chipped. Normally, I would walk about 15 steps and find my apartment door on the left side, about 3 doors down. But that night, I took 15 steps and saw more doors, each door looking exactly like the others. I stopped and looked around, confused. I turned around and looked back toward the stairwell door. I expected to see it right there behind me, but it wasn't. I only saw more corridor and more doors. I rubbed my eyes and took a few careful steps forward. The doors were all the same color and had the same cheap round doorknobs. The numbers looked smudged and unreadable. The light fixtures hummed and flickered overhead. I could see small insects around the bulbs, but I couldn't tell if they were flies or moths. I felt sweat forming under my arms. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down. I told myself I might be tired or maybe I missed my door. I often worked late shifts and sometimes got home disoriented. I counted my steps again, one by one, slowly. I passed one door, then another, then another. The hallway stretched out in front of me like a straight line. I didn't see any turns or corners. I reached what I thought should be my apartment door, but the label was blurred and I couldn't make out the number. I tried the knob. It turned. I swallowed hard and pushed the door open. Instead of my small apartment's living room, I saw another hallway. It looked the same, narrow, with the same walls, the same flickering lights, and the same worn floor. I could hear a faint moan coming from somewhere behind the thin walls. It was a muffled sound, like someone in pain or struggling to breathe. I released the doorknob and stepped back. My heart pounded. I could feel my pulse in my neck. I tried to steady my breathing. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't normal. I closed the door and stood in the corridor. I pressed my ear against the wall. I heard more of those muffled moans. It sounded like more than one person, but I couldn't be sure. There was a dull thump now and then, like someone kicking or hitting something soft. I called out. I said, "Hello?" and waited. No one answered. My own voice sounded hollow and faded. There was no echo, but it felt like the sound didn't travel very far. I decided to walk back toward the direction I had come from. I turned around, facing what I believed to be the way to the stairs. I walked quickly, counting doors, trying to find any detail that would stand out. All the doors looked identical, the same cheap paint, the same cheap metal knobs. The hallway didn't end. The ceiling light fixtures buzzed. The bulbs flickered every few seconds, making it hard to keep my eyes focused. I felt my back tense up. I was sweating more. I could smell my own body odor mixed with the musty smell of the corridor. The air felt thick and my throat felt dry. I tried another door. Locked. I tried another one. Also locked. I tried 3 more in a row. All locked. I knocked hard on one of them. I hit it with the flat of my hand. I yelled for help. I waited. I listened. I heard the muffled moans again. I tried to figure out if the sounds were coming from inside the rooms. I pressed my ear to one of the doors. My ear touched the wood, and it felt smooth, but grimy. The moans were behind the walls, not directly behind the door, as if in the space between the apartments. I knocked again, harder this time until my knuckles hurt. I got no response. I walked again. My legs felt weak. I decided to try my phone. I took it out of my pocket and turned it on. No signal. I tried to call someone anyway. The call didn't go through. I tried texting a coworker, but nothing happened. My battery was at 50%. The screen's light hurt my eyes in that dim corridor. I turned it off and put it back in my pocket. I kept moving, looking over my shoulder from time to time. I didn't see anyone behind me, but sometimes I felt like something moved in the corner of my vision. A shape in the darkness, maybe something crouching near a door frame or standing against a wall. But when I turned to look directly, there was nothing. I heard a soft chuckle once. It was low and breathy. It made the hair on my neck stand up. I tried to say something, to ask who was there, but my voice came out shaky and low. My mouth felt dry. I checked the walls. I ran my fingertips along the surface. It felt solid, but hollow. I tapped lightly. The sound was dull. I tried another door. Locked. I tried to force the knob, twisting it hard. It didn't give. I kicked the door. My toes hurt, and I barely made a dent. I felt stupid and desperate. I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. After walking for what felt like a long time, I tried to mark my place. I took off my jacket and placed it on the floor beside a door. I took a good look at it, remembering the position of the sleeves and the collar. Then I walked on, counting steps, about 30 this time. I turned around and walked back. After another 30 steps, I reached the spot where I placed my jacket. It wasn't there. The floor was empty. I checked the doors around me. No sign of my jacket. I felt a knot in my stomach. I wanted to throw up. I took several deep breaths. The air tasted stale. I felt my knees shaking. I tried the original door I had opened, the one that led into another hallway. I retraced my steps as best I could. I couldn't be sure if I found the same door or a different one. I opened it. Another corridor. I stepped inside it and closed the door behind me. Then I opened it again. Still another corridor on the other side. It looked identical. I moved forward through that door and closed it again, trying to see if I could trap myself in some way. I opened it a third time. Still the same long, narrow hallway. I let the door shut and walked further in. I started to feel thirsty. My throat felt scratchy. My palms were sweaty and my shirt stuck to my back. The humming of the lights never stopped. The flickering bulbs made my head hurt. I tried to yank a bulb from its fixture, thinking maybe I could use it as a marker or break it to get someone's attention. I reached up, but the ceiling was high enough that I had to jump. I jumped a few times, slapped my hand against the light fixture. It burned my palm a little. I couldn't unscrew it. The light kept flickering. I cursed and let my arms drop to my sides. I thought about breaking down a door using something heavy. I had nothing except the keys in my pocket, my phone, and some loose change. I tried kicking a door at the point near the latch. I kicked hard 3 times. The door barely budged. It made a dull thud, and some dust fell from the frame. My foot hurt, and I bent forward, breathing hard. I gritted my teeth. No one answered from inside. The muffled moans continued. Sometimes they grew louder, then faded. Sometimes I heard light tapping or scratching on the other side of the wall. I pressed my ear against the wall again. It sounded close, as if someone stood right behind it, sliding their fingernails against the surface. I yelled through the wall, told whoever it was to come out, to help me, to show themselves. No response. Just a faint snicker, as if someone found my situation funny. I tried to move faster. I jogged along the corridor, hoping to find an end or a door that looked different. My footsteps sounded off, like the corridor absorbed the sound. I breathed heavily and started to sweat more. My heart pounded. After a while of jogging, I noticed no change. Everything looked the same. My legs started to cramp, so I slowed down and leaned against a wall. The surface felt slightly damp, and I pulled my shoulder back in disgust. The corridor smelled old and sour. I checked my phone again. The time hadn't changed much. I tried calling the police, no signal. I tried calling the landlord's number. Nothing. I dialed random numbers, just hoping something would click. The phone just showed no bars. The battery was still above 40%, but that didn't help me. I put the phone away. I considered shouting until my voice gave out, but I didn't want to lose my voice entirely. Still, I called for help again, yelling as loud as I could. My voice sounded flat and tired. I yelled a few times, then listened. I heard the chuckle again, that soft laugh from somewhere behind me. I spun around, looking down the corridor. The lights flickered, and for a second I thought I saw a shape at the far end, standing still. It looked like a person. The shape was dark and still. I raised my hand and waved, hoping they would see me. The shape didn't move. The lights flickered again. The shape was gone. I bit my lip hard until I tasted a bit of blood. My lips were chapped. I decided to try every door I passed, hoping one might open. I tried about 6 doors in a row, all locked. I tried knocking on one and pressing my face against it. I could hear faint breathing sounds from inside. They were slow and steady. I banged on the door and demanded that the person inside open it. No answer. Just that slow breathing. I pounded harder, yelling. The breathing remained steady, ignoring me. I moved on and tried a different door. Locked. Another one. Locked. Another. The knob turned slightly but didn't open. I rattled it until my wrist hurt, but it wouldn't give. I kicked it. Nothing happened. I felt sweat dripping down my face. The corridor's air felt thicker, heavier. I wiped my forehead with my sleeve. I looked up at the ceiling. It looked low and yellowish, with specks of dirt near the light fixtures. I tried jumping again just to see if I could reach something. Nothing useful. I wiped my palms on my pants. I tried to focus on something simple. I tried to remember how many steps I took since I first entered. I counted in my head, but it all became a blur. I noticed my stomach growling. I hadn't eaten since before work. I felt lightheaded. I leaned against the wall and tried to breathe slowly. I didn't smell food or anything like that, just the stale, musty odor. My temples throbbed. The moans behind the walls kept coming and going. Sometimes I thought I heard whispering. I pressed my ear against a door, listened carefully. I heard faint voices mumbling something, but I couldn't make out words. I called back, asking what they were saying. No reply. I stepped back, turned around, and tried walking in the opposite direction. After a while, I noticed no change. Everything looked the same. My footsteps sounded dull. I tried to keep track of the number of light fixtures. 1, 2, 3. After counting about 20, I realized it made no difference. The hallway just stretched on. I felt panic rising in my chest. My breathing became rapid. I clenched my fists. My fingernails dug into my palms. I thought about trying to break a piece of the wall. I kicked the wall, then slammed my shoulder into it. It was painful, and the wall didn't give. I kicked it again, then again until my foot hurt too much. I considered using my keys to scratch the paint. I took out my key and tried scraping a small mark on the wall. The paint chipped a little, leaving a small scratch. I moved forward and kept walking. After a minute, I went back to see if my mark was still there. I couldn't find it. All the walls looked the same. I ran my fingers along them, feeling for the scratch. There was no difference. I felt watched. I turned around slowly, scanning the corridor. The lights flickered. My shadow looked odd against the wall. For a moment, I thought I saw a different shadow move, as if someone else was standing behind me. I spun around, but saw no one. I shouted again, demanding whoever was there show themselves. Just silence, then a soft, muffled laugh that made me shiver. My arms felt cold despite the stale air. I decided to try one more door and face whatever was on the other side. I picked a door at random and grabbed the knob. Locked. I tried another. Locked. I kept trying doors until I found one that turned slightly. This one felt loose. I pressed my shoulder against it, pushing with all my strength. The door creaked, and I felt it give a bit. I pushed harder, groaning, my jaw clenched. Finally, the latch snapped and the door swung open, hitting something inside. I stepped in carefully. Inside, I found no room. There was just another corridor identical to the one I left. I turned around to check the door I came through, but it was gone. Behind me was more hallway. I realized I was stuck in these corridors, moving from one to another. My breathing sped up again, and I felt my hands shaking. I tried walking again. My legs were tired. I felt a slight pain in my chest from all the tension. I stood still for a moment, listening. The moans were still there. The breathing sounds, the faint thumps. The laughter was quieter now, but I still sensed someone was there watching me. I spoke out loud, asking what they wanted. No reply. I kept moving forward, step by step. My shoes squeaked on the floor. The lights buzzed. I passed door after door. Nothing changed. My throat burned from thirst. My back ached from tension. I wiped sweat from my face again. I tried another door. Locked. Another one. Locked. I kicked it once without any real hope. Just another dull thud. I noticed my vision blurring a bit. My eyes felt dry. I blinked a few times. I couldn't tell how much time had passed. My phone still had some battery, but no signal. I took it out and turned it on. The screen glowed, showing the time, but it was meaningless. I tried the flashlight. It worked, shining a bright beam on the wall. I looked closely at the texture of the paint. It was chipped and uneven. I dragged my finger along it. Nothing new, just the same corridor. I turned off the flashlight, saved the battery. I stood there, breathing slowly, trying not to panic. I knew that panicking wouldn't help, but I couldn't help feeling afraid. My stomach clenched and my neck felt stiff. I had no idea how to escape. Everything looked the same. I felt alone, trapped, watched by something I couldn't see. The laughter and moans never stopped, always behind thin walls, always out of reach. I tried running again, hoping that if I kept going, I might find something different. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs ached. I slowed down and stopped, panting. Still the same corridor. Still the same flickering lights, the same locked doors, the same muffled sounds. I shook my head and pressed my forehead against the wall. My skin touched the cold, damp surface. I felt my shoulders slump. I listened. The laughter was quiet now, but I felt eyes on me. I felt them in the darkness just beyond the edge of my vision. I pulled myself away from the wall and took a few shaky steps forward. I tried one last door. Locked. I tried another. Locked. I tried a third. Locked. I stood there, in the silent corridor, my heart pounding, my body tense, my throat dry, my head throbbing. Nothing changed. I realized I was stuck. I waited, listening. The corridor hummed with the sound of the lights. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. I stood still, not knowing what else to do. I felt sure that something watched me, pleased with my helplessness. I couldn't see it, but it was there, silent, patient, enjoying my frustration. I gripped the doorknob in front of me, pressed my forehead against the door and squeezed my eyes shut. I felt trapped, tired, thirsty, and afraid, and the corridor went on, unchanging, unending. It started when I walked into the building's lobby that night after work. I felt tired, and my legs ached from standing all day. The overhead lights were dim, as usual. The landlord never fixed the lighting. I stepped onto the stairs and climbed up to my floor. The building was old and the floors were uneven, so I kept my hand on the rail. I reached my floor after a few flights and I could feel my own breathing through my nose. The hallway was narrow and smelled of stale air. The paint on the walls always looked the same pale color, and the floor tiles were scuffed and chipped. Normally, I would walk about 15 steps and find my apartment door on the left side, about 3 doors down. But that night, I took 15 steps and saw more doors, each door looking exactly like the others. I stopped and looked around, confused. I turned around and looked back toward the stairwell door. I expected to see it right there behind me, but it wasn't. I only saw more corridor and more doors. I rubbed my eyes and took a few careful steps forward. The doors were all the same color and had the same cheap round doorknobs. The numbers looked smudged and unreadable. The light fixtures hummed and flickered overhead. I could see small insects around the bulbs, but I couldn't tell if they were flies or moths. I felt sweat forming under my arms. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down. I told myself I might be tired or maybe I missed my door. I often worked late shifts and sometimes got home disoriented. I counted my steps again, one by one, slowly. I passed one door, then another, then another. The hallway stretched out in front of me like a straight line. I didn't see any turns or corners. I reached what I thought should be my apartment door, but the label was blurred and I couldn't make out the number. I tried the knob. It turned. I swallowed hard and pushed the door open. Instead of my small apartment's living room, I saw another hallway. It looked the same, narrow, with the same walls, the same flickering lights, and the same worn floor. I could hear a faint moan coming from somewhere behind the thin walls. It was a muffled sound, like someone in pain or struggling to breathe. I released the doorknob and stepped back. My heart pounded. I could feel my pulse in my neck. I tried to steady my breathing. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't normal. I closed the door and stood in the corridor. I pressed my ear against the wall. I heard more of those muffled moans. It sounded like more than one person, but I couldn't be sure. There was a dull thump now and then, like someone kicking or hitting something soft. I called out. I said, "Hello?" and waited. No one answered. My own voice sounded hollow and faded. There was no echo, but it felt like the sound didn't travel very far. I decided to walk back toward the direction I had come from. I turned around, facing what I believed to be the way to the stairs. I walked quickly, counting doors, trying to find any detail that would stand out. All the doors looked identical, the same cheap paint, the same cheap metal knobs. The hallway didn't end. The ceiling light fixtures buzzed. The bulbs flickered every few seconds, making it hard to keep my eyes focused. I felt my back tense up. I was sweating more. I could smell my own body odor mixed with the musty smell of the corridor. The air felt thick and my throat felt dry. I tried another door. Locked. I tried another one. Also locked. I tried 3 more in a row. All locked. I knocked hard on one of them. I hit it with the flat of my hand. I yelled for help. I waited. I listened. I heard the muffled moans again. I tried to figure out if the sounds were coming from inside the rooms. I pressed my ear to one of the doors. My ear touched the wood, and it felt smooth, but grimy. The moans were behind the walls, not directly behind the door, as if in the space between the apartments. I knocked again, harder this time until my knuckles hurt. I got no response. I walked again. My legs felt weak. I decided to try my phone. I took it out of my pocket and turned it on. No signal. I tried to call someone anyway. The call didn't go through. I tried texting a coworker, but nothing happened. My battery was at 50%. The screen's light hurt my eyes in that dim corridor. I turned it off and put it back in my pocket. I kept moving, looking over my shoulder from time to time. I didn't see anyone behind me, but sometimes I felt like something moved in the corner of my vision. A shape in the darkness, maybe something crouching near a door frame or standing against a wall. But when I turned to look directly, there was nothing. I heard a soft chuckle once. It was low and breathy. It made the hair on my neck stand up. I tried to say something, to ask who was there, but my voice came out shaky and low. My mouth felt dry. I checked the walls. I ran my fingertips along the surface. It felt solid, but hollow. I tapped lightly. The sound was dull. I tried another door. Locked. I tried to force the knob, twisting it hard. It didn't give. I kicked the door. My toes hurt, and I barely made a dent. I felt stupid and desperate. I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. After walking for what felt like a long time, I tried to mark my place. I took off my jacket and placed it on the floor beside a door. I took a good look at it, remembering the position of the sleeves and the collar. Then I walked on, counting steps, about 30 this time. I turned around and walked back. After another 30 steps, I reached the spot where I placed my jacket. It wasn't there. The floor was empty. I checked the doors around me. No sign of my jacket. I felt a knot in my stomach. I wanted to throw up. I took several deep breaths. The air tasted stale. I felt my knees shaking. I tried the original door I had opened, the one that led into another hallway. I retraced my steps as best I could. I couldn't be sure if I found the same door or a different one. I opened it. Another corridor. I stepped inside it and closed the door behind me. Then I opened it again. Still another corridor on the other side. It looked identical. I moved forward through that door and closed it again, trying to see if I could trap myself in some way. I opened it a third time. Still the same long, narrow hallway. I let the door shut and walked further in. I started to feel thirsty. My throat felt scratchy. My palms were sweaty and my shirt stuck to my back. The humming of the lights never stopped. The flickering bulbs made my head hurt. I tried to yank a bulb from its fixture, thinking maybe I could use it as a marker or break it to get someone's attention. I reached up, but the ceiling was high enough that I had to jump. I jumped a few times, slapped my hand against the light fixture. It burned my palm a little. I couldn't unscrew it. The light kept flickering. I cursed and let my arms drop to my sides. I thought about breaking down a door using something heavy. I had nothing except the keys in my pocket, my phone, and some loose change. I tried kicking a door at the point near the latch. I kicked hard 3 times. The door barely budged. It made a dull thud, and some dust fell from the frame. My foot hurt, and I bent forward, breathing hard. I gritted my teeth. No one answered from inside. The muffled moans continued. Sometimes they grew louder, then faded. Sometimes I heard light tapping or scratching on the other side of the wall. I pressed my ear against the wall again. It sounded close, as if someone stood right behind it, sliding their fingernails against the surface. I yelled through the wall, told whoever it was to come out, to help me, to show themselves. No response. Just a faint snicker, as if someone found my situation funny. I tried to move faster. I jogged along the corridor, hoping to find an end or a door that looked different. My footsteps sounded off, like the corridor absorbed the sound. I breathed heavily and started to sweat more. My heart pounded. After a while of jogging, I noticed no change. Everything looked the same. My legs started to cramp, so I slowed down and leaned against a wall. The surface felt slightly damp, and I pulled my shoulder back in disgust. The corridor smelled old and sour. I checked my phone again. The time hadn't changed much. I tried calling the police, no signal. I tried calling the landlord's number. Nothing. I dialed random numbers, just hoping something would click. The phone just showed no bars. The battery was still above 40%, but that didn't help me. I put the phone away. I considered shouting until my voice gave out, but I didn't want to lose my voice entirely. Still, I called for help again, yelling as loud as I could. My voice sounded flat and tired. I yelled a few times, then listened. I heard the chuckle again, that soft laugh from somewhere behind me. I spun around, looking down the corridor. The lights flickered, and for a second I thought I saw a shape at the far end, standing still. It looked like a person. The shape was dark and still. I raised my hand and waved, hoping they would see me. The shape didn't move. The lights flickered again. The shape was gone. I bit my lip hard until I tasted a bit of blood. My lips were chapped. I decided to try every door I passed, hoping one might open. I tried about 6 doors in a row, all locked. I tried knocking on one and pressing my face against it. I could hear faint breathing sounds from inside. They were slow and steady. I banged on the door and demanded that the person inside open it. No answer. Just that slow breathing. I pounded harder, yelling. The breathing remained steady, ignoring me. I moved on and tried a different door. Locked. Another one. Locked. Another. The knob turned slightly but didn't open. I rattled it until my wrist hurt, but it wouldn't give. I kicked it. Nothing happened. I felt sweat dripping down my face. The corridor's air felt thicker, heavier. I wiped my forehead with my sleeve. I looked up at the ceiling. It looked low and yellowish, with specks of dirt near the light fixtures. I tried jumping again just to see if I could reach something. Nothing useful. I wiped my palms on my pants. I tried to focus on something simple. I tried to remember how many steps I took since I first entered. I counted in my head, but it all became a blur. I noticed my stomach growling. I hadn't eaten since before work. I felt lightheaded. I leaned against the wall and tried to breathe slowly. I didn't smell food or anything like that, just the stale, musty odor. My temples throbbed. The moans behind the walls kept coming and going. Sometimes I thought I heard whispering. I pressed my ear against a door, listened carefully. I heard faint voices mumbling something, but I couldn't make out words. I called back, asking what they were saying. No reply. I stepped back, turned around, and tried walking in the opposite direction. After a while, I noticed no change. Everything looked the same. My footsteps sounded dull. I tried to keep track of the number of light fixtures. 1, 2, 3. After counting about 20, I realized it made no difference. The hallway just stretched on. I felt panic rising in my chest. My breathing became rapid. I clenched my fists. My fingernails dug into my palms. I thought about trying to break a piece of the wall. I kicked the wall, then slammed my shoulder into it. It was painful, and the wall didn't give. I kicked it again, then again until my foot hurt too much. I considered using my keys to scratch the paint. I took out my key and tried scraping a small mark on the wall. The paint chipped a little, leaving a small scratch. I moved forward and kept walking. After a minute, I went back to see if my mark was still there. I couldn't find it. All the walls looked the same. I ran my fingers along them, feeling for the scratch. There was no difference. I felt watched. I turned around slowly, scanning the corridor. The lights flickered. My shadow looked odd against the wall. For a moment, I thought I saw a different shadow move, as if someone else was standing behind me. I spun around, but saw no one. I shouted again, demanding whoever was there show themselves. Just silence, then a soft, muffled laugh that made me shiver. My arms felt cold despite the stale air. I decided to try one more door and face whatever was on the other side. I picked a door at random and grabbed the knob. Locked. I tried another. Locked. I kept trying doors until I found one that turned slightly. This one felt loose. I pressed my shoulder against it, pushing with all my strength. The door creaked, and I felt it give a bit. I pushed harder, groaning, my jaw clenched. Finally, the latch snapped and the door swung open, hitting something inside. I stepped in carefully. Inside, I found no room. There was just another corridor identical to the one I left. I turned around to check the door I came through, but it was gone. Behind me was more hallway. I realized I was stuck in these corridors, moving from one to another. My breathing sped up again, and I felt my hands shaking. I tried walking again. My legs were tired. I felt a slight pain in my chest from all the tension. I stood still for a moment, listening. The moans were still there. The breathing sounds, the faint thumps. The laughter was quieter now, but I still sensed someone was there watching me. I spoke out loud, asking what they wanted. No reply. I kept moving forward, step by step. My shoes squeaked on the floor. The lights buzzed. I passed door after door. Nothing changed. My throat burned from thirst. My back ached from tension. I wiped sweat from my face again. I tried another door. Locked. Another one. Locked. I kicked it once without any real hope. Just another dull thud. I noticed my vision blurring a bit. My eyes felt dry. I blinked a few times. I couldn't tell how much time had passed. My phone still had some battery, but no signal. I took it out and turned it on. The screen glowed, showing the time, but it was meaningless. I tried the flashlight. It worked, shining a bright beam on the wall. I looked closely at the texture of the paint. It was chipped and uneven. I dragged my finger along it. Nothing new, just the same corridor. I turned off the flashlight, saved the battery. I stood there, breathing slowly, trying not to panic. I knew that panicking wouldn't help, but I couldn't help feeling afraid. My stomach clenched and my neck felt stiff. I had no idea how to escape. Everything looked the same. I felt alone, trapped, watched by something I couldn't see. The laughter and moans never stopped, always behind thin walls, always out of reach. I tried running again, hoping that if I kept going, I might find something different. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs ached. I slowed down and stopped, panting. Still the same corridor. Still the same flickering lights, the same locked doors, the same muffled sounds. I shook my head and pressed my forehead against the wall. My skin touched the cold, damp surface. I felt my shoulders slump. I listened. The laughter was quiet now, but I felt eyes on me. I felt them in the darkness just beyond the edge of my vision. I pulled myself away from the wall and took a few shaky steps forward. I tried one last door. Locked. I tried another. Locked. I tried a third. Locked. I stood there, in the silent corridor, my heart pounding, my body tense, my throat dry, my head throbbing. Nothing changed. I realized I was stuck. I waited, listening. The corridor hummed with the sound of the lights. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. I stood still, not knowing what else to do. I felt sure that something watched me, pleased with my helplessness. I couldn't see it, but it was there, silent, patient, enjoying my frustration. I gripped the doorknob in front of me, pressed my forehead against the door and squeezed my eyes shut. I felt trapped, tired, thirsty, and afraid, and the corridor went on, unchanging, unending. I arrived at the old country house on Friday afternoon just before sunset. I had parked my car in a small clearing a short distance from the front door. There were no neighbors, no passing cars, and no noise apart from some distant rustling in the tall grass. The house stood by itself, 2 stories tall, made of old wooden boards and chipped paint. There were a few steps leading up to the front porch. Inside, there was a small kitchen, a living room with a low coffee table, and a bedroom upstairs. It looked simple. I hadn't been here before, but the rental listing said it was quiet. I wanted 2 nights of rest, so I brought enough groceries and some basic supplies. There was electricity, running water, and a decent bed. That was all I needed. I set my bags down inside and checked each room. Everything seemed normal. The living room smelled like old furniture. A window overlooked the fields outside. I saw a few shapes standing out there. They looked like scarecrows. There were about 3 of them, scattered in different spots among the tall grass. Each one wore old clothes. Their hats were tilted forward. Their faces were made of straw and cloth. I remember noticing they had odd features. Some kind of black stitches around the mouths, small circular patches for eyes, and a few scraps of old fabric hanging from their sleeves. Nothing alarming, just old scarecrows. I planned to rest that evening, so I fixed a quick meal. I boiled some pasta, ate it with some canned tomato sauce, and drank water. The kitchen was small but functional. Afterward, I decided to go for a walk to get some fresh air before settling in. I stepped outside and headed toward the fields. The sun was low. The grass brushed against my legs. I walked carefully, avoiding uneven ground. While I approached the nearest scarecrow, I noticed something about its face. Its mouth was twisted in a strange way, and the black stitches around it looked tight. The eyes were just empty holes covered by thin fabric. I could see straw inside. The hat leaned forward and the shoulders slumped. I saw some dirt and bugs crawling around the base. There was a slight smell of old burlap. I stepped back and looked around. The other scarecrows had similar clothes, old jackets and pants stuffed with straw. Some wore hats, some wore hoods. All of them faced the house at an angle, as if placed randomly, but they seemed oddly focused. I felt a slight chill on my arms, but I told myself it was normal. Scarecrows are just objects stuck into the ground, nothing more. It was getting dark. I returned to the house. The door closed fine, and the locks worked. The kitchen window was secure. The living room windows had wooden frames and old locks, but everything held together. Upstairs, the bedroom had a window facing the fields. I looked out before pulling the curtains. I could still see the scarecrows out there. They seemed the same. I rubbed my eyes. I felt a bit uneasy, but I was tired from the drive. I unpacked my clothes and set my toothbrush and soap in the small bathroom. The bathroom light flickered a bit. I turned it off, then on again. It was stable after that. I got into bed early. The mattress was stiff and the sheets smelled clean enough. I laid there, staring at the ceiling. The wind outside picked up a little. I could hear the creaking of some loose board outside, or maybe an old branch rubbing against the wall. Around midnight, I got thirsty. I stood up and went downstairs to get a glass of water. I walked barefoot. The floorboards felt cold. I turned on the kitchen light, drank some water, and leaned against the counter. My eyes drifted toward the window. I could see the dark outline of the field. I couldn't see the scarecrows from there, but I remembered their positions from earlier. I tried not to think about it. I turned off the light and went back upstairs. I climbed into bed again. This time I looked out the bedroom window before lying down. The curtains were thin, and through the gap, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. One of the scarecrows seemed closer than before. I was sure it had been at least 30 feet away. Now it looked about 20 feet away. Another one, the one with the hood, had its head tilted at a different angle. I stood there, gripping the windowsill, trying to stay calm. Scarecrows don't move. Maybe I misremembered their positions. Maybe the wind pushed them or something. But they were on wooden stakes. They shouldn't shift that easily. I closed the curtains and got into bed. I tried to calm myself. My breathing felt faster. My heart thumped in my chest. I lay there listening. The wind outside carried faint rustling sounds. Sometimes it sounded like footsteps on dry grass. I couldn't sleep. After a while, I heard a light tapping sound. It was so soft I thought it might be a tree branch. I sat up, looked at the curtain. I could see a faint shape behind it. I reached for the switch and turned on the bedside lamp. The tapping stopped. I stood up and walked toward the window. I pulled the curtain back just an inch. Outside, right below the window, I saw a shape leaning against the wall, a dark outline of straw and old fabric. One of the scarecrows was now almost right under my window. I stepped back, breathing through my mouth. I tried to think of something logical. There must be a person outside moving these things, but why? I didn't see anyone else arrive. No vehicles, no lights. I kept the lamp on, hoping that would discourage whoever was doing this. I waited by the window for several minutes. Then I heard a scraping sound along the wooden walls outside. It sounded slow and uneven. I thought I saw a thin straw arm reach upward. I stepped back further, my back hitting the bedpost. My legs felt weak. My hands shook. I felt sweat on the back of my neck. I couldn't see a face clearly from this angle, just the top of a hat and the edge of a stitched cheek. I closed the curtain quickly and turned around, trying to control my breathing. I decided to check the house. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and went downstairs. I tested the front door lock. It was secure. I checked the windows in the living room. They were locked. I looked outside from a corner of the window, trying to remain hidden. I saw two scarecrows now much closer than before, standing about 10 feet from the porch. One had a hand raised, as if pressing against thin air. Another had its head tilted, facing the front door. Neither moved while I watched, but their positions were different from what I remembered. I was sure they had been farther away before. I felt my stomach tighten again. My forehead felt warm. My hands were moist. I wanted to leave, but it was the middle of the night. My car was parked outside a few yards away. I would have to walk right past them. I didn't want to do that. I decided to stay inside and wait for morning. I looked at the time on my phone. It was around 2 a.m. The phone had no signal. The battery was half full. I considered calling the police, but there was no service. I felt alone and exposed. I turned off the flashlight and decided to go back upstairs. Maybe I could block the window somehow. I pushed a chair from the corner of the bedroom against the window frame. It wasn't very strong, but at least it made me feel like I was doing something. I had no weapons apart from a kitchen knife. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to shout. I feared that any noise might encourage them or whoever was behind this. I sat on the bed, fully dressed, my shoes on, facing the window. I listened carefully. The wind was steady now. The scraping sound stopped. I leaned forward, trying to catch any sound. After a few minutes, I heard a soft rustle at the back of the house. I imagined them circling around. I pictured them dragging their straw limbs, adjusting their hats, repositioning their stiff legs. My breath came in short bursts. I told myself to stay calm. No one was getting inside. The walls were solid wood. The windows had glass and locks. The door was locked. They were just scarecrows, or maybe someone's sick prank. I spent another hour like this. Every few minutes I checked the curtain, just a tiny gap. At one point I saw the top of a straw head directly outside, right at window level. There was no ladder or anything, yet it seemed to be rising. The hat pressed against the glass. I pulled the curtain closed immediately. I backed away. My heart pounded. I thought I heard a faint scratching sound, like straw fingers rubbing the glass. My throat felt dry. I took sips of water from a bottle I had brought upstairs. I bit my lip, trying not to panic. A few more minutes passed. I heard footsteps on the roof. They were light and uneven, like someone walking with stiff legs. I saw dust falling from a small gap in the ceiling boards. Something was on the roof, pacing slowly. I considered running outside to my car, but I pictured them waiting at the door. I didn't want to face those stitched faces and straw arms up close. I tried to remember if I had locked the back door. Yes, I had checked all doors and windows. I was sure. I heard a light tapping on the bedroom window again. I refused to look this time. I just sat there, breathing through my nose. My hands were clenched into fists. My legs shook. My chest felt tight. The tapping grew louder. It sounded like something scraping the glass, then tapping lightly, like it was testing it. I kept my eyes on the floor. My phone's screen lit up as I pressed it. No service. The time read 3:30 a.m. I had to hold out until sunrise, maybe around 6 a.m. or so. That felt like forever. The tapping stopped. I waited, straining my ears for any other sound. Minutes passed. Then I heard something at the front of the house, a slow, sliding noise. I thought maybe one of them was dragging something along the porch floor. I bit my lip harder. I considered opening the window and shouting at them, but I had no idea how they would react. They were too quiet, too persistent. Suddenly, I heard a dull thump against the wall outside, then another thump on the opposite side. It was as if two of them were signaling to each other. I stood up and went to the staircase. I looked down into the living room. It was dark. The front window showed only blackness outside. I turned on a small lamp and then turned it off quickly, worried I might attract their attention to that window. I cursed under my breath. I was trapped. Around 4 a.m., something new happened. I heard a soft voice-like sound, very faint. It wasn't words, just a low humming. It came from outside, near the back window in the kitchen. I moved slowly down the stairs, step by step, trying not to make noise. I reached the kitchen. I stood by the doorframe listening. The humming sound stopped. I carefully reached for the kitchen window and raised a corner of the curtain. There was a face staring back at me. It was close to the glass, maybe an inch away. It had no real eyes, just stitches and straw. Its head seemed tilted. I couldn't see it move, but I felt it was aware I was looking at it. I jerked back, knocked into the table, and made a noise. I heard a light scraping outside as it pulled away. I wanted this night to end. My legs felt weak. My body was tense and my neck was sore from stress. I didn't see a way out. I checked the back door lock one more time. It was still secure. I considered turning on every light in the house, but I worried they might get bolder if they saw me clearly. The next hour was quiet. I stayed in the living room close to the stairs where I could run up or down if I needed. I listened for footsteps, tapping, or scraping. I didn't hear anything. By 5 a.m. I began to hope they had left. Maybe they lost interest. I went to the window once more. I saw no shapes in the darkness. I waited another 15 minutes. Nothing. I climbed back upstairs. The bedroom window was still covered by the curtain, and the chair pressed against it. I moved the chair aside and checked outside. The field was still dark, but I could see the shapes of the scarecrows back where they had been originally. They stood in their old positions as if they had never moved. My eyes strained to confirm what I was seeing. They were all spread out again, at least 20 or 30 feet away. There were no arms raised, no heads tilted against the glass. Everything looked still and quiet. I waited until the first light of dawn started to show. Around 6:15 a.m., I saw a pale light creeping over the field. The scarecrows remained in place, unmoving. The silence outside felt different now. I decided not to stay another night. I packed my bags quickly. I didn't make breakfast. I didn't even shower. I just grabbed everything, went downstairs, and checked the windows and doors again. I looked outside. With more light, I saw the scarecrows clearly. They looked ordinary again. I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cool and smelled like damp grass. I scanned the area. No one was around. I walked toward my car, keeping an eye on the scarecrows. They didn't move. I didn't see any footprints, at least none that looked human. The ground was uneven and covered in dry grass. I unlocked the car, tossed in my bag, and got inside. I started the engine and looked back at the house one last time. It stood quietly. The scarecrows were still there. I didn't feel safe until I was driving down the dirt road, putting distance between me and that field. I never figured out what happened that night. I told myself maybe it was a series of weird coincidences or my imagination under stress. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know those scarecrows were not where I left them. Something moved them. Something tapped on my window and scraped the walls. Something tried to get my attention, toying with me as if testing how far it could go. I made it out unharmed, and I saw no reason to look back. I never returned to that house. I never rented anything from that listing again. As I drove back toward the city, I kept checking the rearview mirror. I expected to see something behind me, standing in the distance by the roadside. But there was nothing, just empty fields. I got home by midday, locked my door, and sat in my apartment, thinking about the night I spent there. I felt tired, tense, and relieved to be back. I poured a glass of water, drank it all, and tried to push the memory out of my mind. I don't plan on going back to any old country house anytime soon. I don't need that kind of weekend getaway ever again. I moved into this house 3 days ago. The place is big, empty, and quiet. The main floor feels normal enough. Clean wooden floors, walls without decorations, boxes stacked in the corners. The upstairs rooms are all bare, a few old furniture pieces left behind by the previous owner, mostly dusty chairs and a heavy desk. There is a wide hall at the top of the stairs that leads to small bedrooms, all unlocked and empty. Everything upstairs is ordinary. The basement is where things feel off. I noticed it on the first day. The basement walls have old paint. The floor is rough concrete with some cracks, and there are a few shelves with old cans of paint and cleaning supplies. In the far corner, behind a large metal rack, I found a door covered with rusted chains and a thick padlock. The door looks older than the rest of the house. The wood is rough and dark. The hinges are large and worn. The chains are wrapped around it several times, and the padlock is large, old and corroded. There is a damp smell down there, a smell like stale air and mold. I tried to ignore it on the first day. I had other things to do, like unpacking and fixing some broken tiles in the bathroom upstairs. But the door stayed in my mind. On the second day, I went back down with a flashlight. I shined the beam along the edges. I could see no obvious gaps. The door frame seemed solid. The chain links were rusted but still strong. I tapped the door with my knuckles. It made a dull sound, not hollow, not solid. Behind it, I heard nothing. It might lead to a storage space or some old hidden room. It could be an old wine cellar. I knew old houses sometimes had these strange locked areas. On the third day, I tried to focus on other tasks, but I kept thinking about that door. I headed down again in the evening. It was quiet in the basement. The temperature felt colder, even though it was summer outside. I stood in front of the door, turned off my flashlight, and pressed my ear against the wood. At first, I heard only my own breathing. Then, I noticed a faint sound. It was low, a kind of whispering. I could not make out words. It sounded like several voices speaking very softly all at once. My heart started beating faster. I leaned in harder, pressing the side of my head against the door. The whispers grew louder. The voices were weak, as if they had not spoken in a long time. They sounded desperate, but I still could not understand the words. It felt like they were begging for something. I spoke in a low voice. "Hello? Is someone there?" There was no clear response. The whispers continued. I pulled back and turned on my flashlight. I grabbed the chain and pulled on it. The chain rattled. I heard a thud from behind the door, like something hitting it from the other side. I waited. My hands felt clammy and my legs felt tight. I pulled the chain again. Another thud. Then more whispers, faster and louder. I still could not understand the words. The smell was getting worse. I noticed a thin layer of mold on the walls near the door. The mold formed strange shapes. They were just random patches, nothing I could identify, just dark spots and fuzzy clusters. I coughed and backed away. I did not feel comfortable staying close, but I also felt a strong urge to find out what was behind that door. I decided I would try to break the lock. I went upstairs to find my tools. I had a crowbar, a hammer, and a metal file. I also grabbed a small flashlight to hold in my mouth if I needed both hands. I walked back down step by step, feeling a growing tightness in my stomach. When I reached the basement floor, I noticed the air felt heavier. It was as if the space behind the door was affecting the rest of the basement. I stood in front of the door and put the crowbar against the chain. I tried to lift it and pry the padlock. The metal scraped, and a bit of rust flaked off. Then I heard a solid hit from the other side, as if someone banged on the wood with their fist or an object. I stopped. The whispers turned into a rattling sound, quick breaths or muffled speech. My heart was beating hard. I could feel a thin layer of sweat on my neck and forehead. I cleared my throat and spoke again. "Who's there? I'm just trying to see what's inside." No answer, just that strange whispering. I pressed my ear against the door again. The voices sounded angry now, or at least agitated. They were not just begging. They sounded like they wanted out. I wondered if there was someone trapped in there. But how could that be? The chains looked ancient. The padlock was coated in rust. There were no signs that anyone had opened it in years. The room on the other side probably had no exit and no windows. I could not imagine someone surviving back there. I tried the crowbar again. I wedged it under the loop of the padlock and applied pressure. The metal groaned. I heard more banging on the door. The door shook in its frame. I stepped back, holding the crowbar in front of me. My shoulders felt tense. I listened to the sounds from behind the door. They grew louder, more frantic. It sounded like multiple hands hitting the wood. The chain rattled on my side as the door shook. I tried to shine my flashlight through any crack, but there was no gap wide enough to see through. I decided to try a different approach. I needed to break the chain. I placed the file against a link and started sawing. It made a sharp, scraping noise. As soon as I started, the pounding from behind the door got stronger. It was as if the thing or things inside knew what I was doing. They seemed excited by it. The whispers turned into low moans. It was not a scream, but it sounded urgent. The smell got worse, like old wet wood and decaying leaves. I kept filing. The link was thick. My arm got tired. I stopped for a moment and took a few deep breaths. The basement was quiet again, except for a faint scraping sound from behind the door. It sounded like nails on wood, slow and steady. I shined my flashlight on the mold patches. They were larger than before, spreading over the corners. I could see small droplets of moisture on the concrete floor. My throat felt dry. I rubbed my hands together and went back to work on the chain. This time I placed the crowbar at an angle and hit it with the hammer. The lock gave a bit, but not enough. While I hit the lock, the door shook. The thing inside hit back in rhythm with my hammering. Every time I swung, I heard a loud hit from the other side. I began to sweat more. My shirt stuck to my back. The basement lights were dim, and my flashlight beam jumped around as I moved. My breathing was fast and shallow. After several hits, the lock bent slightly. Rust fell to the floor. The whispers were now mixed with heavy breathing. I said, "I'm going to open this. Just don't do anything crazy." No response. I kept hitting the lock. After a few more tries, the padlock cracked on one side. I pried it open with the crowbar. The chain fell loose, sliding off the door and landing at my feet with a dull clank. The door remained closed, but nothing held it shut now. I hesitated. My heart was pounding. I grabbed the doorknob. It was cold and damp. My hand shook. I twisted it and pushed. The door did not budge. I put my shoulder into it and pushed harder. It gave a little and then stopped, as if something was blocking it from inside. I stepped back and kicked near the lock. The wood cracked. Another kick and it opened a few inches. I smelled a sour, moldy odor. I felt a gust of cold, damp air on my face. The darkness inside was complete. I shined my flashlight through the gap. I saw rough stone walls, patches of mold and dirt on the floor. It looked like a small room with no furniture, no windows, just uneven walls and a low ceiling. The floor looked wet. There were no obvious objects, just a dark corner I could not see well. I pulled the door open a bit more, careful not to step inside. I said, "Hello?" My voice sounded weak. Something moved in the corner. I heard shuffling footsteps, slow and uneven. My flashlight beam caught a figure standing against the far wall. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. His clothes were old and torn. His skin looked pale and rough. He did not speak. He moved toward the door with unsteady steps. His breathing was loud and wheezing. I stepped back, holding the flashlight and the crowbar. He came closer, reaching the doorway. His eyes were open, but they did not focus on me. I could not see their color well. He stepped into the basement light. He smelled bad, like old sweat and wet soil. He was thin, with long, tangled hair. He looked weak but determined. He tried to pass me, moving slowly but firmly. I did not know what to do. I raised the crowbar and said, "Stop." He ignored me. He did not even look at me. He just kept walking forward, heading toward the stairs. I blocked his path, pressing my free hand against his chest. His shirt was damp and cold. He grunted and pushed back. He felt stronger than I expected. I tried to hold him in place, but he twisted to the side. He made a low sound in his throat. I said, "Who are you?" He did not answer, just pushed past me. I stumbled back and nearly dropped the flashlight. He walked to the stairs, dragging his feet, leaning on the railing as he climbed. I followed him, staying a few steps behind. I felt confused and nervous. My stomach was tight. My breathing was uneven. I had no idea who this person was or how he ended up in that hidden room. He reached the top of the stairs and tried the door to the main floor. It was unlocked. He opened it and stepped into the hallway. I followed him into the hallway. He left muddy footprints on the wooden floor. He looked around, moving his head slowly. The house was quiet. He walked toward the front door. I ran around him and blocked it with my body. I said, "Wait. I want to know what's going on. Talk to me." He looked at me for the first time. His eyes looked gray and dull. He opened his mouth, but only a dry whisper came out. I could not understand any words. He stepped closer, trying to reach the doorknob behind me. I raised the crowbar again and said, "Stop. I'm serious." He did not seem to care. He reached for the knob. I put my hand on his arm. His skin felt cold. He pulled away, and then tried again. I did not want to hit him. He did not seem violent, just determined. I stepped aside, not sure what else to do. He opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The night was quiet outside. There were no cars on the street. He walked across the lawn, heading toward the sidewalk. I followed him. He moved slowly, his shoulders slumped. He left a trail of muddy footprints on the grass. His breathing was still rough. I said, "Where are you going?" He did not respond, just kept moving. He turned the corner and started walking down the road. I stood there, holding my flashlight and crowbar, wearing the same clothes I'd put on that morning. My throat felt dry. I watched him get smaller in the distance. He did not run. He just kept walking. I did not know what else to do. I felt uneasy and tired. I looked back at my house. The front door was still open, the lights on inside. The basement door to that strange room stood open too, and the chain and lock lay on the basement floor. I walked back inside and shut the front door. I locked it. I went downstairs again, shining my flashlight around the basement. The smell was still there, a mix of mold and dampness. The hidden room was open and empty now. I looked inside. The walls were rough stone. The floor had puddles of water. There were strange marks scratched into the stone, like grooves or uneven edges. There was nothing else inside. No furniture, no tools, no sign of food or bedding. Just that wet, cold space. It did not seem like anyone could live there comfortably. I felt my heart still beating fast. My forehead was damp with sweat. I pulled the door closed. It made a dull creaking sound. I picked up the chain and padlock. The lock was broken. I dropped them on a shelf and stood there for a few moments, trying to calm down. The basement was quiet again. No whispers, no thuds. I tapped the door with my knuckles. Nothing answered. I tried to push it open again. It moved easily now. The space was empty. There was no other exit inside. Just 4 stone walls and a small, low ceiling. I wondered who that man was. He looked old, but I could not tell his exact age. He was thin, dirty, and silent except for those whispers I had heard before opening the door. He never said a clear word. He did not seem surprised to see me. He just wanted out. Now he was gone, walking down the street. I had no idea where he was headed. I considered going after him, but I felt uneasy and weak. My legs were shaky, and my arms felt heavy. I went back upstairs and closed the basement door behind me. I washed my hands in the kitchen sink. The water was cold. I watched the dirt and rust run off my skin. My hands were still trembling. I dried them on a clean towel. Then I walked to the front door and made sure it was locked. Everything was quiet outside. I checked the house. The main floor was in order, except for the footprints and some dirt near the basement stairs. Upstairs was the same as before. I returned to the living room and sat down on a wooden chair. My body felt tense and my head throbbed slightly. I took deep breaths and looked around. The house felt different now, not just empty. It felt uncertain and unstable. I had let something out. I had no idea what had happened or who that man was. He was gone now, and I was alone again, but it did not feel normal. It felt strange. I stayed there for a while, listening to the silence. The house made small creaking sounds. The refrigerator hummed quietly. The air still smelled faintly of mold from the basement. I considered cleaning that room or calling someone to seal it up, but I did not feel ready to go back down there again. I felt tired and needed to rest. I needed time to think about what to do next. For now, I would leave it alone. There was nothing else inside that room. It was empty now, just an open space with mold and damp stones. I placed the flashlight and crowbar on the kitchen table. I washed my face at the sink. The water felt cold on my cheeks. I dried off and stepped into the hallway again, listening carefully. No sounds came from below. Everything was still. The front door was locked. The windows were closed. The man was gone. I had set him free. I could not explain it, but that was all I knew. He had been trapped behind that door, and now he was not. I shut off some lights and headed upstairs to my bedroom. It was late. The house was dark and quiet. I did not feel safe, but there was nothing to do now. I would try to sleep and figure it out in the morning. If I ever saw him again, I would ask him who he was. But I doubted I would. There was no reason for him to return. I left that thought alone and tried to calm my breathing. Nothing else moved in the house that night. I got the clock from a distant relative who sent it without a note. It was delivered to my apartment door in a large wooden crate around midday. The delivery guy just handed me the clipboard. I signed, and he walked off without a word. I dragged the crate into my living room and pried it open with a small crowbar I keep in the hall closet. Inside, there was a tall pendulum clock. Its wood was dark and smooth, but the surface showed several small scratches. The clock's carvings looked grim. I saw carved faces around the top and sides with hollow eyes and tight mouths. The pendulum was heavy and shiny. I lifted the clock out of the crate and placed it against the wall near my sofa. It was taller than my chest. It smelled like old wood, dust, and something I couldn't name. I stood there looking at it, feeling a slight chill in my arms. I wiped some dust off the glass front panel. The clock wasn't working at first, so I opened the small door below the face to start the pendulum. I pulled it back and let it swing. The ticking started right away, slow and steady. I closed the door and stepped back. The hands were set at around 2 o'clock, but at that moment it was probably close to 3:30 in the afternoon. I tried adjusting the clock's hands, but the knob at the side wouldn't budge. I shrugged and decided to leave it as is for now. For a while, nothing strange happened. I sat on the sofa, looked at the clock, and listened to the steady tick. I opened a beer and took a few sips. My apartment was quiet except for that subtle ticking sound. I had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. It was just an old clock, maybe a bit creepy in style, but that was all. Later that day, as the light outside became dim, I noticed something off about the clock's chimes. Instead of chiming on the hour like I expected, it chimed when the sun was halfway below the horizon. I happened to glance at my watch when it started. My watch read 6:43 p.m., but the clock's chimes came out slow and heavy. I counted the chimes. There were 4. The clock's hands showed some odd time, not anywhere near a quarter to anything. The sound rattled in my chest. It wasn't loud, but it felt heavy. After the chiming stopped, the pendulum's reflection looked strange. I got up and moved closer. I saw something inside the reflection that didn't match my own face. It showed a distorted face with sunken cheeks. I stepped back and shook my head, blinking hard. When I looked again, I only saw my own confused face. That night, I turned on the living room lamp and tried to read a magazine on the sofa. The clock's ticking felt louder in the quiet room. Every time I looked at it, I saw the pendulum swinging slowly. I noticed my chest felt tight. I took some deep breaths. I felt a strange sense of being watched. I looked behind me. Nothing was there. I stood up and walked around the room to check if something was casting a shadow. Nothing unusual. I tried turning off the lamp to see the reflection in the glass again. With the lights off, the faint glow from the street lamp outside let me see the shape of the pendulum. I leaned forward, trying to look at my reflection. My breath felt warm against the glass. I saw something flicker. It looked like a face that didn't belong to me. I jerked back and hit my elbow on the wall. I cursed under my breath. When I looked again, I only saw the pendulum and my own outline. Over the next few days, the clock behaved oddly. Instead of chiming on the hour, it chimed at random times. Just after sunset, around midday when the room felt still, and sometimes in the middle of the night. I woke up once at around 2 a.m. to the sound of it chiming 3 times. I got up, checked my watch, and saw it was 2:07 a.m. The clock's hands were pointing somewhere around 7 and 11, not making any sense. Its pendulum never stopped swinging, and it never matched real time. One afternoon, I sat in front of the clock and studied it. I watched the pendulum carefully, trying to catch any strange reflection. It was quiet in my apartment. I could hear my own breathing. I leaned close, hands on my knees, staring into the pendulum's polished surface. I saw something moving in the reflection. It looked like a dim room with wooden chairs and a fireplace. The scene looked old, like a place from another century. I moved my head slowly to see if it was just an angle trick. The scene stayed. I saw shapes that looked like people standing in that old room, but I couldn't see their faces clearly. I felt my heart beat faster. My forehead got damp. I tried touching the pendulum's surface. It felt cold. The image flickered and disappeared. I stood up and circled the clock. I touched the carvings along the sides. My fingertips felt shallow grooves. I noticed tiny faces carved near the edges that I hadn't seen before. They had blank eyes, sharp noses, and narrow foreheads. They felt rough under my fingertips. I pulled my hand away, feeling uncomfortable. I tried to move the clock a bit closer to the wall. It was heavier than it looked. I managed to shift it a few inches. The pendulum swung unevenly for a moment, then returned to its steady pace. The ticking resumed without delay. That evening, I turned on the TV in the living room to drown out the clock's sound. I put on some random show, but my eyes kept drifting to the clock. I felt as if something was standing behind me. I got up and turned around fast, but the room was empty. My heart pounded. I noticed my shirt sticking to my back. I wiped my palms on my jeans. I looked at the front door and thought about stepping outside, but I stayed. I lowered the volume and listened. The clock kept ticking. After a few minutes, it chimed again. I muted the TV and listened. The chimes were slow and hollow. I tried to count them, but I lost track. They seemed to resonate in my skull. When it stopped, I noticed my hands were shaking. I took a breath and tried to calm down. I decided to leave the apartment for a bit. I grabbed my keys and jacket and went downstairs. I walked around the block for about half an hour, trying to clear my head. When I returned, it was late. I entered the apartment and switched on every light in the living room. The clock stood there against the wall, quiet. The pendulum swung gently. I walked right up to it and checked its face. The hands were pointing to an impossible time again, something like 10:27, but my watch said it was almost midnight. I tapped the glass. The pendulum's reflection looked normal. I stared at it for a few seconds. Suddenly, I felt a presence at my shoulder, as if someone was standing close enough to breathe on my neck. My skin prickled. I spun around and saw nothing but the lamp and my armchair. My stomach felt hollow. I clenched my teeth and moved away from the clock. In the following days, the clock's behavior got worse. I started hearing its chimes at random hours, not just when the sun was setting or rising. Sometimes I'd hear them when I was in the kitchen, heating up soup, and I'd rush to the living room to see what time it was. The hands never matched. Once I tried to stop the pendulum. I opened the front glass panel and grabbed the pendulum with my hand. It felt cold and heavy. The ticking stopped the moment I touched it. I held it still for maybe a minute, letting my arm tense. When I let it go, it started swinging again on its own. I didn't wind it. I didn't do anything, but the clock just carried on as if nothing happened. I tried to ignore it. I stopped looking at the pendulum. I kept the TV on more often, but at night, when everything was quiet, I could hear the ticking and it sounded louder. I could feel it in my pulse. I tried moving the clock into the hallway outside my apartment, but it was too big and heavy, and I was worried I'd damage the walls. I considered covering it with a sheet. One evening, I did just that. I took an old white sheet and draped it over the entire clock, covering everything but the bottom. For a while, I felt better. The pendulum's sound was muffled. I could still hear it, but it was softer. Then the chimes started again, this time while it was covered. The chimes made the sheet tremble slightly as if there was a draft. I stepped closer and held my breath. I could see the outline of the pendulum through the thin fabric. I saw movement that didn't match the pendulum's simple swing. I pulled the sheet off quickly. The pendulum shone bright under the living room light. I could see my reflection clearly. Behind me in the reflection, I saw a figure standing near the sofa. I turned around fast. No one was there. I turned back to the pendulum. My reflection showed only me in the room. No figure. I backed away and sat down on a chair. I could feel sweat on my forehead. I wiped it with the back of my hand and stared at the floor. That night, I tried sleeping with the bedroom door closed. I hoped the door would block out the clock's sound. I lay in bed, listening. The ticking was faint, but still there. I closed my eyes and tried to relax. After what felt like a long time, I heard a muffled chime. It wasn't a full chime, more like a half ring that got stuck. I sat up in bed, straining my ears. Nothing else. I waited. Eventually, I heard the normal ticking again. I kept the door closed and stayed in bed. In the morning, I walked out and found the clock's door slightly ajar. I hadn't left it open. I rarely touched it. The pendulum kept swinging. I decided to call someone. I called a friend who deals in antiques, hoping he could tell me how to fix the clock's timing problem. He came over in the afternoon. I told him it was an old family piece sent to me without instructions. I didn't mention the strange reflections or the presence I felt. He inspected it for a good 10 minutes, looked at the carvings, tried the knob at the side, and shrugged. He said he couldn't fix it. He said it looked like it needed specialized attention. He recommended a clock repair shop downtown. I thanked him. He left. While he was here, I didn't notice anything odd. The clock behaved, ticking quietly. I felt almost stupid, like I had imagined the strange moments. But after he left, I checked the time on my watch and waited. That evening, the clock chimed at 6:22 p.m. My watch showed 6:17 p.m. The difference was small, but still there. I watched the pendulum closely. I saw a flicker again, like a scene from a different era. I could make out a man in old clothes walking across a wooden floor. The image lasted a few seconds. Then it was gone. The next day, I tried to record the pendulum's reflection with my phone camera. I set up the phone on a stool, angled it carefully, and pressed record. I watched the pendulum through the camera's screen. At first, I only saw my living room. I recorded for about 5 minutes. I played the video back. I saw nothing unusual, just my living room, the clock, and me standing behind the phone. I tried again that night when the light in the room was dim. I recorded for a full 10 minutes. When I played it back, I noticed a brief flicker at around 7 minutes. The reflection in the pendulum seemed to show a figure behind me. I paused the video and looked closely. It was blurry, but it looked like someone standing there. I froze the frame. I didn't recognize the person. They seemed tall, wearing old-fashioned clothes with a serious expression. I felt my stomach tighten. I glanced behind me in real life. I saw no one. I put my phone down and breathed heavily. I decided I needed to get rid of this thing. I tried to move it out of my apartment. I got gloves, I removed the pendulum piece and tried to lift the main body. It was too heavy. I couldn't do it alone. I tried to disassemble parts of it. The screws were rusted. I gave up after struggling for over an hour. I pushed and shoved until I managed to move it closer to the door. I planned to call someone to help me carry it out the next day. I left it there, slightly angled in the hallway inside my apartment. That night I heard a muffled voice. It wasn't clear words, just a soft sound that resembled a voice trying to whisper without forming actual words. I approached the clock, my heart pounding. I pressed my ear against its side. I heard ticking and something like a scraping sound. The wood felt cold. I pulled away. I stood there in my hallway, staring at the carvings. The little faces carved into the wood seemed different. I couldn't be sure, but it looked like their mouths were slightly open now. I ran my finger over them. They still felt rough and old. I stepped back, keeping my eyes on the clock's face. The hands spun slowly, not in the normal direction. They made a soft clicking noise. I watched them spin for about a minute before they stopped at a random time. I tried sleeping again, but now the sound felt like it was coming through the walls. I put on headphones and listened to music until I fell asleep from exhaustion. In the morning, I woke up and checked the living room. The clock was still there, silent. The pendulum kept swinging. I tried ignoring it. I brewed coffee, turned on the news, and pretended life was normal. But my body felt tense. I jumped at small noises. I couldn't focus on anything for long. My eyes kept drifting to that hallway. I felt trapped. In the afternoon, I made a phone call to a local antique dealer, asking if they would buy a large pendulum clock. The person on the phone said they might be interested, but they needed photos. I hung up and took several photos. In the pictures, the clock looked normal, just an old dark wood clock with odd carvings. Nothing indicated what I had experienced. I sent the pictures and waited. They replied saying it looked interesting, but they couldn't pick it up until next week. I felt my mouth go dry. I didn't want this thing in my home any longer, but I had no immediate way to remove it. As evening fell, I noticed the pendulum swinging slower than before. I watched it carefully. My shoulders were stiff, and I kept swallowing hard. I leaned in close to see if there was another image inside. The pendulum's surface looked dull now, not as reflective. I saw only a blurry outline of my face. As darkness filled the apartment, I turned on the hallway light. The clock began to chime. I stepped back and counted the chimes. They came at irregular intervals, sometimes a few seconds apart, sometimes almost overlapping. My ears rang. When it finally stopped, I took a deep breath and placed a hand on my chest. I felt my heart thumping. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a towel, and wrapped it around my hand. I returned to the clock and tried to stop the pendulum again. I held it firmly. The ticking stopped. The apartment fell silent except for my breathing. I stood there holding the pendulum still for several minutes until my arm started aching. I thought if I kept it still long enough, maybe the clock would reset or break. Finally, I let go. It started swinging again right away. I let out a shaky breath and wiped sweat from my face. At that moment, I heard a creaking sound behind me. I spun around and saw no one. I checked my front door. It was locked. I turned back to the clock. Everything looked normal, but I didn't feel normal. My neck was stiff, my back hurt, and my skin felt clammy. I grabbed a chair, pulled it into the hallway, and sat there watching the clock until midnight. The clock never chimed at midnight. It remained silent. My watch showed 12:03, then 12:04. The clock's hands didn't match any real time. They pointed at random positions, shifting slowly. I stayed there, waiting for something else. Nothing happened. Eventually, I got up and went to bed, leaving the lights on. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how to get rid of this thing tomorrow, how to call a moving service, how to push it out of my life. I tried not to think about what I'd seen inside the pendulum or what I'd felt standing behind me. I just wanted it gone. I found the chest on a Saturday morning when I was alone. I had been clearing out my attic because I wanted to organize everything before selling some old junk. The attic smelled like dust and mold. My hands felt the dry surface of old cardboard boxes, and my nose itched. I shoved aside a few boxes and noticed a corner I never really explored. There was a wooden chest with chipped paint and a broken lock. I touched the lid, and it felt rough. I lifted it, expecting nothing important. Inside, I saw a set of wooden puppets lying on top of old rags. Their arms and legs were thin, and their joints were made of small pegs. Each puppet had a face carved into old wood. Their eyes were made of glass, but the glass was cracked and chipped. Some had crooked smiles. Others looked like they were trying to grin, but their faces ended up twisted. A few had torn clothing that looked like cheap fabric. Dust stuck to their clothes and hair. They smelled stale, like old furniture and dried glue. I picked one up. It felt lighter than I expected. Its head rolled to one side, making a soft click. I moved its arm and it stayed where I put it. I placed it back and wiped dust off my hands. I decided to leave them in the attic because I had no reason to keep them downstairs. I closed the chest and dragged it near a stack of boxes. Then I left it alone. That night, after dinner, I tried to relax in my living room. I turned off the television around midnight and headed to bed. As I lay in bed, I noticed a faint sound above me. It sounded like something tapping lightly on wood. I listened for a moment, breathing quietly, and then I heard a small click. It was soft, like a piece of wood knocking against another piece of wood. I got out of bed, stood still, and listened again. The sound stopped. I waited a few minutes. Nothing. I told myself it might be something outside or the attic settling. I went back to bed. The next morning, I went back up to the attic because I needed to continue organizing. I saw the chest in the same place I left it, but the lid looked slightly open. I remembered closing it all the way the day before. I walked closer and lifted the lid. I saw that the puppets were not arranged the same way. They were not stacked in a neat line anymore. Some of them were sitting upright, facing each other. One was leaning against the side of the chest, its arm raised. Another had its head tilted back as if it were looking at the ceiling. Their eyes, even with the cracked glass, pointed in different directions now. I felt my neck stiffen, and my stomach felt heavy. I knew I had placed them back in a careless but simple pile. Now they looked arranged in a rough circle. I tried to remain calm. Maybe I accidentally moved them more than I realized. Maybe I forgot. I adjusted them again, placing them flat and facing upward, arms by their sides. I made sure I closed the lid completely. I even placed a box on top to keep it secure. Then I left the attic and kept busy with other tasks. I tried not to think about it too much. That night I couldn't sleep well. I sat in the dark, listening for noises. Around 1 in the morning I heard it again. A light tapping sound from above. It was a soft click and a faint scraping noise like a small wooden piece sliding against a rough surface. I sat up in bed. My mouth felt dry. My shoulders were tense. I got out of bed and walked quietly toward the attic door. I flicked on a hallway light. The noise stopped. I climbed the ladder into the attic, flashlight in hand, and aimed it at the chest. The box I placed on top was on the floor. The chest lid was open. The puppets were out of the chest and placed around it. Some stood in strange positions, leaning against each other. A few looked like they were facing me. One had its arm raised toward me, and another had its head bowed down. My heart thumped hard, and I could feel sweat under my arms. I stepped closer. I looked at the wooden floor of the attic. I noticed small scratches that I hadn't seen before, like tiny scuff marks. I touched one puppet's arm to see if it was loose. It moved easily. I felt the rough wood on my fingertip. I set it down and backed away slowly. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't explain it. There were no animals around and no one else in the house. No children, no neighbors with a key. Just me. The puppets did not move while I watched them. They stayed still and silent. I put them back in the chest one by one, carefully. Their faces all looked worn. Their eyes seemed to reflect the flashlight beam, making my heart pound harder. I closed the chest, pushed a heavy box on top, and returned downstairs. I locked the attic door. I checked the windows and doors in the house. Everything was locked. I went back to bed and listened to my own breathing until I finally slept. The next day, I woke up late. I made coffee, but it tasted bitter, and I couldn't focus on anything. I didn't want to go back to the attic, but I needed to know what was going on. I grabbed my phone and decided to record a video while I went up. If something strange was happening, I wanted proof. I climbed the attic ladder slowly. I opened the door, holding my phone up, camera recording. I pushed aside the box and opened the chest. Inside, the puppets were arranged again. They were sitting in a row this time, all facing the inside of the chest. It looked like they were watching something. I saw a small piece of fabric in front of them, arranged like a tiny stage curtain. I didn't remember this fabric from before. I leaned in. It smelled old and dusty. I recorded everything. The puppets did not move. I reached in and flipped them one by one, showing their fronts and backs. Their clothes had dust on them, but I noticed that it looked disturbed, as if recently touched. I found a loose thread on one puppet's shirt that looked freshly pulled. None of this made sense. That night, I sat in bed with my phone on the bedside table, ready to record. I left the attic door locked, but I doubted it would help. Around midnight, I heard nothing. I waited, staring at the ceiling. Then, close to 2 in the morning, I heard the soft clicking sound again. I held my breath, grabbed my phone, and went upstairs. The attic door was unlocked, though I remembered locking it. I opened it slowly, stepping on the wooden boards. I aimed my phone camera at the chest. I saw the puppets standing around an old cardboard box. They were arranged in a circle. One puppet held a small piece of paper in its wooden hand. Another puppet had its arm around a dusty photograph. I shined my flashlight on them. I saw that the photograph was of me as an adult, standing in front of this very house. I do not remember ever keeping such a photo in the attic. I moved closer. My hands shook. I picked up the photo. On its back, I saw a date written in pen. It was an old date. It made no sense to me. I saw a few more papers scattered inside the chest. They looked like receipts, letters, and notes, all related to my own life. The puppets were showing me these items. They placed them in a way that felt like a scene. They looked like they were acting out something. Each puppet faced another puppet, as if they were in a conversation. I stood there, sweat gathering on my forehead. I knelt down and touched one puppet's hand. It felt smooth and old, with slight cracks. I picked up one of the letters. It mentioned my name. It also mentioned a time in my past when I lied about something. I saw my handwriting on a piece of paper I didn't remember writing. It was a note I must have written long ago, admitting I had taken money from a relative's drawer. I never told anyone that. Yet here it was, a private note that I forgot existed. The puppets presented it to me as if performing a silent play. My stomach felt tight, and my pulse throbbed in my temples. I felt ashamed and confused. I tried to speak, but my voice came out weak. I said, "What do you want?" There was no answer. I picked up the puppets and put them back into the chest. They felt like ordinary puppets, just wood, fabric, and glass eyes. But I could not ignore what I saw. I shoved the letters and photos into a folder and took them downstairs. I locked the attic door again. Over the next few days, it continued. Every night, I heard the clicking and tapping. Every morning, I found the puppets arranged in different poses. Sometimes they were grouped around a small item from my boxes. Other times, they formed a line that looked like a silent performance. They always showed me something related to my past. I found old bank statements, old receipts, a ring I lost years ago, a set of keys I never remembered owning, and other small objects that belonged to me or my family. The puppets acted as if they were putting on a show, but they never moved when I watched them directly. They only changed positions when I left them alone. I tried moving the chest to another spot, but every night it ended up back in its original corner. I tried nailing the chest shut, but the next morning the nails were pulled out and placed neatly on a shelf. I felt tired and on edge. My hands trembled sometimes when I climbed the attic ladder. I felt my heart beating hard in my chest. I sweated through my shirt just standing there. I tried something else. I set up a small camera to record the attic overnight. I hid it behind a box. The next morning I checked the footage. The camera recorded nothing but darkness and a slight shuffle of shadows. When I played it back slowly, I only saw a brief flicker of movement like a wooden limb shifting. Nothing clear. I felt frustrated and anxious. Each time I went back up there, the puppets showed me something else. One night, they arranged themselves around an old letter opener and a stack of old letters addressed to my grandfather. I read them and found that my family once owned another property I never knew about. Another night, they showed me a small diary with torn pages. The diary mentioned people I knew but had forgotten. It described events from years ago that I did not remember well. The puppets seemed to drag these items out of hidden places I never searched before. They opened old crates. They moved rotten pieces of cloth. They unrolled old rugs. They revealed secrets piece by piece. I tried to destroy one puppet. I took it downstairs one afternoon and tried to break it with a small hammer. The wood cracked slightly, but when I tried to hit it again, I felt a deep discomfort in my chest. I stopped. I felt guilty. I don't know why. I took the damaged puppet upstairs again and placed it back inside the chest. That night, the puppets arranged themselves around the damaged one. They touched the cracked wood with their wooden fingertips. One puppet pointed at me. I felt a chill run along my arms. I stepped back, nearly tripping over a box. My breathing was quick and shallow. I realized I could not win by force. I decided to watch closely. I waited in the dark corner of the attic one night, holding my breath. I hid behind some boxes. I tried to stay awake. For a long time, nothing happened. It was cold and dark. The attic was silent. My legs hurt from crouching. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. Then I heard a very soft clicking sound. I leaned forward. I saw a puppet tilt its head just a bit. Another puppet raised an arm and lowered it again. I heard a quiet scratch as they moved their legs. They shifted positions slowly, like careful actors. When my foot slipped and made a noise, they stopped. They froze in place. I held my breath. After several minutes, they started again, lifting small items, arranging them in a pattern. I saw them place a folded note on top of a box. They stood around it. I grabbed the note as soon as they stopped moving. It mentioned my father and a secret agreement he made long ago. I never knew anything about that. It involved an old document hidden under the floorboards in a closet. I checked the closet the next morning and found a loose board. Under it was a small metal tin with more old letters. These letters explained gaps in my family history. I realized the puppets were trying to show me these things. They were not attacking me. They were not trying to scare me. They were leading me to discover parts of my own life I either forgot or never knew. Still, it made no sense, and I felt uneasy. My stomach felt tight every time I went up there, and my hands shook when I picked up each new item. I felt the rough paper under my fingertips, smelled the old ink, and heard the creaking boards under my weight. My heart thumped every time I made a new discovery. After several days of this, I tried something else. I gathered all the items they had shown me, letters, receipts, photos, small trinkets, and placed them on the floor in front of the puppets. I arranged them in a neat row. I stood back and said, "I see them. I understand." There was no sound, no movement. I waited for a few minutes. The puppets did not move. They remained still, their cracked glass eyes staring ahead, their crooked smiles unchanged. I felt a slow release of tension in my shoulders. I felt my breathing calm down. I left the attic and went downstairs. I sat in my kitchen, reading the letters and notes. They filled in many gaps in my memory. They explained old family issues, old arguments, old decisions I never understood before. They showed me reasons behind certain choices I made when I was younger. They proved that I had kept secrets even from myself. That night, I went to bed without expecting anything. I did not hear any clicking or tapping. The attic remained quiet. In the morning, I went upstairs and checked the chest. The puppets were inside, arranged in a simple pile, just like the first day I found them. They looked like normal old puppets. I tried moving one arm and it stayed where I put it. I closed the chest. I left it there. I do not know how they moved or why. I only know what I saw. I can describe the sound of their wood tapping against the chest, the feel of their dusty clothes, the look of their cracked eyes. I know they showed me things I never would have discovered alone. I never tried to remove them from the attic again. I still feel tense when I think about it, but I cannot deny what happened. They acted without words, but they showed me secrets I had buried. Now I leave them alone. I keep the attic door locked, but I know if they want to move again, they will. I do not plan to provoke them. I do not plan to destroy them. I have learned to accept what I saw. I never liked looking at the barn after midnight. Tonight I could see a thick fog crawling around it. The boards on its walls had broken sections that let some kind of glow come through. From my bedroom window I saw lights that looked pale and uneven. They shifted around inside, but I could never see them clearly. I had tried ignoring them on previous nights, but they had grown more intense lately. Tonight, they were brighter and seemed to move faster. I wanted to sleep, but I could not relax. My chest felt tight and the quiet inside my house felt unnatural. I got up, put on my boots, and decided to check what was going on. I left my house and walked straight toward the barn. The path between my front door and the barn entrance was damp. I felt a slight chill against my face. The grass under my boots felt soft and slippery. I heard nothing else but my own breathing. My hands shook a bit and my mouth felt dry. I pressed my lips together and tried to stay calm. I saw the fog around the barn's walls and roof. It hung there without moving much, like a heavy curtain of moisture. I smelled something stale in the air, like old leaves and wet soil. I reached the barn door and paused. The door looked warped. The wood felt rough under my fingertips. There were rusted hinges that did not seem reliable. As I pressed my ear against the door, I caught a faint moaning sound. It sounded muffled, like it came from somewhere deep inside, passing through old hay and wooden beams. I listened for a few seconds. The sound rose and fell without any clear pattern. I took a step back, pulled on the handle, and the door creaked open. Inside, it was dark, except for a few weak beams of light coming through the broken boards. The air felt heavier than outside. It smelled like damp earth and old metal. My boots scraped against the floor, which felt uneven. I could see old farming tools on the walls and scattered around the ground. Most of them were covered in rust. A few pitchforks leaned against a beam, and some shovels lay on the ground. I recognized some hand scythes and old hammers. I never bothered to throw these things out because I rarely used the barn. I stepped forward and heard a clank to my left. I turned my head and saw a shovel moving slightly. It scraped against the wall, but I did not see anyone holding it. I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight. I moved closer and reached out, but the shovel fell to the floor with a loud thud. I jumped back and banged my elbow against a wooden pillar. My heart beat faster. I tried to breathe slowly, but my breaths came out short and shaky. I whispered to myself that maybe it was just loose and fell on its own. But as I thought that, I saw one of the pitchforks shift. It slid across the floor, its tines scratching the wood with a sharp noise. I held up my hands and tried to see if there was a draft or something pushing it. The air felt still. My skin prickled on my arms and neck. The glow from outside seeped through the cracks in the walls, and I saw thin beams of light dancing around. They changed shape and position without any pattern. I walked deeper inside, keeping my back close to a side wall. I watched every step, checking the floor for loose boards or nails. I did not want to trip. As I moved farther in, I heard the moaning sounds again. They seemed to come from behind a stack of old crates. The crates smelled like mold and rotting hay. I approached them and peeked around. Nothing was there except a few broken planks and a bent metal hook. I turned around to face the main space of the barn again, and I saw movement near the center. An old wooden ladder that had always been leaning against the wall was now lying flat, and a rake I had not touched in years stood upright. Its handle looked worn out, but it was standing on its end without anyone holding it. It trembled a bit, then fell sideways and hit the ground with a dull sound. I rubbed my eyes and tried to focus on what I could see. I heard a scraping sound behind me. I turned and saw a hoe sliding across the floor. It made a low, dragging noise. My heart pounded and I felt sweat on my forehead. I wiped it away with my sleeve. My breathing was fast and shallow. I wanted to leave, but I also wanted to understand what was happening. I stepped back toward the door, but something blocked my way. There was a large pile of hay I did not remember pushing there. It smelled musty and damp, and it was stacked too high. I tried to walk around it, but I tripped over a small stool that had moved right behind me. I landed on my knees. My knees hurt against the hard floor. I pressed my hands down and pushed myself back up. When I stood up again, I noticed something else. The shadows in the barn were strange. There were shadows on the ground and walls, but I could not find their sources. Some looked like long, thin shapes moving slowly across the floor. Others were smaller and flickered near the corners. I spun around, trying to find what was causing them. The faint lights that came through the cracks were not bright enough to cast such distinct shadows. My stomach tightened, and my chest felt heavy. I heard a soft whispering sound coming from above. I looked up at the rafters and saw nothing, just old beams and dusty cobwebs. As I lowered my gaze, I felt something on my neck. It was cold and firm, like a hand with no warmth. I jumped and reached back, swatting at the air. I felt nothing there. But as soon as I lowered my arm, I felt it again. It pressed against my skin, then moved across my shoulder and disappeared. I stepped away, swinging my arms around me, feeling foolish but too afraid to think clearly. I tried to find a path out. I looked at the door, but the hay pile and some old carts had somehow shifted in front of it. I did not remember them being there when I came in. I walked toward a side window, but it was boarded up from the outside. I tried pulling on the boards, but they were stuck. I looked at the other side of the barn. There was a small door that led to an equipment shed. Maybe I could get out that way. I moved slowly, keeping my eyes on the floor and walls, watching for any more moving tools. As I got closer to the equipment shed door, I noticed a pitchfork lying in my path. Its handle pointed toward me, and its tines pointed away. I stepped around it carefully. As soon as I passed it, I heard it scratch the floor. It moved behind me. I turned and saw it slide toward a pile of grain sacks. I tried to ignore it. My breathing was fast. My mouth felt dry. I could taste sweat on my upper lip. I reached the small door and tried the latch. It was stuck. I pulled harder, and the latch made a grinding sound, but it would not open. I kicked the door. It rattled, but stayed closed. I looked around for a tool I could use to pry it open, but I did not trust the tools in this barn anymore. I heard another moan, this time louder. It rose up from under the floorboards, or maybe it came through the walls. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. My heartbeat throbbed in my ears. I tried to move some crates out of the way, thinking I could find another window or a weaker spot in the wall. As I lifted a crate, I felt something brush past my leg. It felt like a rope or a cord trailing against my calf. I jumped back and dropped the crate. It landed on my foot. My toes hurt, and I cursed under my breath. The moaning faded into a low hum and then stopped. I picked up a hammer from the floor. It felt solid in my hand. I walked to the wall and hit one of the boards, trying to break it. The hammer slipped from my grip and flew out of my hand. It landed somewhere behind me with a dull thump. I felt frustration and fear at the same time. I wiped my palms on my pants and tried again with another tool, an old crowbar. As I picked it up, it twisted in my hand and nearly fell. I gripped it tighter and swung it at the same board, but the wood held firm. I struck again and I saw a small crack form. I hit again and a splinter broke off. I tried to pull at the crack with my fingers, but it was too small. I heard a scraping sound next to me. I looked and saw a rake dragging itself across the floor. It moved in jerks, scraping loudly. I backed away, keeping my eyes on it. The rake stopped. Something else fell from a shelf, a metal bucket. It landed upside down and rolled in a half circle. I felt trapped. I tried to remain focused on getting out. I still had the crowbar. I pressed the crowbar into the crack and pushed. The board creaked and split a bit more. I pushed harder. The board snapped, leaving a small opening. I looked through it. I could see the outside. The fog was still thick, but I saw the faint light of my porch lamp in the distance. I tried to break another board to make the hole bigger. I wedged the crowbar into the next board. I struggled with it, pulling and pushing. I felt a chill on my neck again. I did not look back this time. My hands shook, and my wrists felt sore. I forced myself to keep working. I managed to loosen the second board. I tore it off with my hands, ignoring the splinters. Now I had an opening big enough to squeeze through if I crouched. I heard a sudden metallic clang behind me. I turned my head just enough to see a pitchfork rising up on its end. It tilted forward. I dropped to the ground and crawled toward the hole. My knees hurt against the floor. My shoulders grazed the broken wood. I felt the edges scratch my arms. I pushed through. My back scraped against a nail. I clenched my teeth and kept going. As soon as my head and shoulders were out, I heard the moaning again, louder than before. It sounded angry or upset. I kicked my legs to get through the hole, and something grabbed my boot. I felt a pull. I kicked harder. The grip slipped off. I slid out of the barn and fell onto the wet grass outside. I coughed and spat. My lungs felt heavy. I rolled over and lay on my back, looking up at the night sky. The fog covered most of it, but I could see a patch of dark sky with no stars. I got up on my feet and moved away from the barn. My legs were shaky. My arms hurt. My neck felt cold where that invisible hand had touched it. I did not look back at the barn right away. I just kept walking until I reached my front door. My boots left damp footprints on the porch. I stepped inside my house and locked the door. I stood in my hallway, breathing hard. I listened. Everything was quiet inside. I peeked out of the window toward the barn. The fog still hovered around it. I could see the faint lights shifting behind the broken boards. I heard no moaning from here, though. My heart was still pounding. I wiped sweat off my face. My hands were dirty and I had a few scratches on my forearms. I turned on the kitchen light and checked my arms. They were bleeding a bit from the splinters. I washed them with cold water. I felt relieved to be inside. I felt safe here. I tried to listen for any sound coming from outside. I heard nothing. No wind, no voices, no scraping, just silence. The barn was only about 50 yards away, but from inside the house it seemed distant. I closed the blinds and sat down at the kitchen table. My muscles were tense. My stomach felt upset. I took a few deep breaths. I flexed my fingers and tried to calm down. I rubbed my neck where I had felt the cold pressure. My skin felt normal now, just a bit clammy. I looked at my boots covered in mud. I looked at my shirt, damp with sweat. I knew I would not sleep much tonight. I stood up, filled a glass with water, and drank it. My throat still felt dry, but at least the water tasted normal. I wondered if I should try to clear the barn out tomorrow, maybe in daylight, but the thought made me uneasy. I did not want to step inside that place again soon. I turned off the kitchen light and walked quietly to my bedroom. I pulled the curtain shut and sat on the edge of my bed. I did not bother taking off my boots yet. I listened carefully for any sound. The house was silent. My heart rate slowed down a bit. I tried to focus on my breathing. In the darkness of my bedroom, I thought about the tools moving on their own. I thought about that moaning sound. I remembered how the pitchforks and shovels slid across the floor. I remembered the feeling of those cold hands on my neck. I felt a chill run down my back. I looked at the window. The curtains were closed, but I could imagine those lights still out there, drifting behind broken boards. I tried to push the thought away. I stayed awake for a long time, sitting on my bed, just listening. I did not hear anything else. No scraping, no moaning. Only the soft hum of the night air outside my house. My arms still stung from the scratches. I took off my boots and threw them aside. I lay down, staring at the ceiling, my body tired but my mind alert. I stayed that way until I felt my eyelids grow heavy. I knew I had survived this night. I knew I would need time to figure out what to do next. But for now, I just waited for sleep to come, hoping that the barn would stay quiet until morning. I found it late in the afternoon. I was behind my house cleaning up the backyard. There were old planks stacked against a corner of the fence. The ground was uneven. The sun was still out, and the air felt dry. I was moving these planks to a pile closer to the shed. They were damp in some spots. Underneath them, I noticed a gap in the soil. I cleared a bit more, tossing aside brittle boards covered in dirt. As I worked, I saw it was a circular hole. It looked like an old well. The bricks inside the hole were rough and cracked. The interior was dark, no reflection of water at the bottom. I knelt down. My knees hurt a bit on the rough ground. I leaned my face closer. It smelled stale and cold inside. I didn't see anything. I expected at least some old water, maybe murky and still. But it was empty. There was no sign of moisture. I stuck my head over the opening. I tried to see the bottom. I only saw blackness. I stayed like that for a while, trying to guess how deep it went. Then I heard something. It was quiet and low, like a voice too far away to understand. I listened, holding my breath, leaning forward a bit more. It sounded like my name. The sound was not clear. It was just a slight murmur, a soft whisper, but it came from inside the well. I pulled my head back. I looked around my yard. There was no one there. There were no neighbors in sight. The only sound should have been the wind, maybe a distant car on the street. But I had heard a whisper of my name coming from inside that hole. I felt a rush of nervous heat on my face. I leaned in again. This time, I kept my eyes open, trying to see if something moved down there. I heard it again. It said my name just once, stretched out slowly. I got a chill along my arms. The voice had no emotion. It sounded flat and calm, but I could not place any identity behind it. It was not a voice I knew. I stayed quiet. I tried whispering a hello down the well, but the only response was silence. Then, after a few seconds, I heard soft breathing echoing up from below. I stood up. I looked at the boards I had removed. They had clearly been placed there a long time ago. There were old nails and bits of rope. Someone must have wanted this well sealed. I looked back into the hole. It was just darkness, no light inside. The air that came out felt slightly cooler. I decided to cover it again. I placed the old boards back over it. Some were broken, but I arranged them so the opening was mostly blocked. I finished the rest of my chores. I tried to put the strange event out of my mind. By the time I went inside the house, the sun was going down. I ate a quick dinner and turned on the TV. I kept thinking about the whisper. The sound of it saying my name stuck in my head. I couldn't explain it. There were no pipes under that spot, no reason for a voice. Maybe it was just the wind moving through old bricks. When I went to bed, I left the window open a crack. My bedroom faces the backyard. I could see the dim shape of the shed and the pile of planks out there. I fell asleep, but sometime in the night I woke up with a start. I lay there for a moment, blinking. I had the sense that I'd heard something. I listened. At first I heard only my own breathing and the rustle of a small breeze outside. Then I caught it again. The whisper. It was faint, muffled by the boards. It said my name, just once. I held my breath. I waited. The sound came again, rising from somewhere below my yard. The voice had no accent, no clear tone. It just spoke my name at a slow, steady pace. My chest tightened. I got up quietly. I walked to the window. I looked out. The yard was dark. Nothing moved. I tried to imagine that it was a neighbor playing a prank, or maybe an animal making a strange noise. But I knew it was not that. It was a voice. It used my name. It came from that well. I shut the window. I paced around the room. I checked the door. Everything was locked. I returned to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling. Now and then, I would think I heard a slight whisper again. It didn't stop. Not entirely. After a while, I started to sweat. My heart beat fast. I felt a dryness in my mouth. Eventually, I must have drifted off because I woke up with a headache the next morning. I went outside right after breakfast. The boards were still there. I tapped them with my foot. They rattled slightly. I listened, but I heard nothing. The day was bright. The birds were out. Everything seemed normal. I pushed on the boards and peered through a gap. The blackness inside was the same as before. No movement, no sign of anything. I walked around the yard. The fence on all sides was solid. There were no footprints, no signs of anyone entering during the night. I took a long metal rod from the shed and tapped it against the boards. The sound echoed down the well. I waited, but got no response. After a few minutes, I went back inside. That night, I had trouble relaxing. I put on some music to distract myself. I watched a long movie. I tried to think of anything else. Eventually, I turned off the lights and got into bed. The moment I closed my eyes, I felt tense. My muscles were stiff. I listened. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, just when I started to feel a bit calmer, I heard it again. It was clearer now, as if closer. I opened my eyes and stared at the dark corner of my room. The whisper came in through the window, not loud, but steady. It said my name in a calm, slow voice. Then I thought I heard something else, like a faint scraping sound. It was like someone moving inside a tight space. I sat up. I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand. I felt my heart pounding hard. I went to the backyard door. I unlocked it and stepped out. The grass felt cool under my bare feet. The air smelled fresh. I aimed the flashlight at the boards. They looked the same, but I could see a slight gap, like one board was pushed up by an inch or two. I froze. My breathing got shallow. I shone the light on that gap. The inside of the well remained black. Then I heard a scratch, like nails scraping against stone. I wanted to call someone, but who would I call? The police wouldn't believe me if I said I heard a voice in an old well. Maybe a neighbor would help me, but it was late. I just stood there, feeling a tightness in my chest. After a few minutes, I slowly approached the well. I put my foot on the loose board and pressed it down. The wood creaked. I listened for a reaction. The whisper said my name again, very close this time. I jumped back and almost dropped the flashlight. I forced myself to kneel down and remove the top board. I aimed the flashlight inside. I leaned in carefully. The beam of light showed old bricks, cracked mortar, and dark walls going down, but I couldn't see the bottom. The light just ended in darkness. I stared, waiting for something to move. I thought I saw a slight shift in the shadows, like a shape sliding along the wall. My shoulders got tense and I felt sweat along my forehead. I pulled back and put the board in place again. I went inside, locked the door, and did not sleep. By morning, I felt shaky and weak. I made coffee and drank it, trying to steady my nerves. I decided I had to deal with this. I went out again, removed all the boards, and looked inside. I dropped a small piece of brick down. I never heard it hit the bottom. It was as if the hole went on forever. I took a hose and tried to shine water down just to see what would happen. The water dripped and vanished. There was no splashing sound. I checked my watch and listened for a full minute, but heard nothing. Then, right when I was about to cover it again, I heard breathing. It was not my own. It came from inside. It was steady and slow. I felt a chill run down my arms. I pulled away and put the boards back, placing a heavy stone on top this time. I spent the rest of the day gathering supplies. I found some old heavy bricks and a bag of concrete mix in the shed. My plan was to seal it permanently. Whatever was down there, I would close it off. In the afternoon, I mixed the concrete in a plastic tub. I carried it over, pushed aside the boards, and poured the mixture in. I filled the top few inches of the well, sealing it. I smoothed the surface with a trowel. I hammered a piece of plywood over it for good measure, then stacked bricks on top. When I finished, I was exhausted. My back ached. My hands were dirty and stiff. That night, I tried to sleep again. I left the window closed. I locked all the doors. Around midnight, I thought I heard a faint grinding noise from outside. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. The noise sounded like something pushing against bricks. I waited, listening. The sound continued in short bursts, sometimes a scratch, sometimes a low thump. Around 2 a.m., I heard my name spoken again, as if forced through a small crack. I tried covering my ears with a pillow, but I still heard it. My heartbeat was fast. I felt nausea building in my stomach. I did not go outside. In the morning, I checked the well. The plywood was cracked. The concrete surface I had poured had a long, thin fracture line. Something had pressed against it from below. I removed the bricks and looked at the fracture. It was small, but I could see it went deep. I touched it with my finger. The whisper started again, louder now. It said my name once, then paused. Then it repeated it, each time sounding slightly clearer. I backed away and ran to the shed. I found some heavy metal plates stored behind old tools. I dragged them out and placed them over the plywood. I stacked cinder blocks on top until I had a heavy barrier. For a few days, I avoided the backyard at night. I tried playing loud music in the house to cover any sound. Still, sometimes when I muted the TV to listen, I could hear a faint scratching sound from outside. My sleep got worse. I woke up drenched in sweat more than once. I started feeling jumpy and tense during the day. I avoided talking to neighbors. I avoided looking at the spot where the well was. I tried to focus on other tasks, but my mind kept returning to that voice. After several nights of poor sleep, I decided to try something else. I bought a small camera and a battery-powered light. During the day, I removed all the coverings again. I lowered the camera and the light down on a rope, trying to record what was inside. I lowered it several feet. The rope paid out and I kept going. It felt like there was no bottom. After a long time, I pulled the camera back up. I replayed the recording. I saw only brick walls and darkness. The walls seemed to go on and on. There was no open space, just endless brick going deeper. The sound on the recording was just static and a faint breathing noise. My name repeated once near the start. I had trouble breathing after watching that. I set the camera aside and covered the well again. That night I heard louder scraping. I got up and stood by the back door listening. It sounded like something heavy moving against the inside of the well. I heard the metal plates shift. I heard my name again, louder now. I picked up a flashlight and opened the door a crack. The backyard was dark and quiet. The stack of cinder blocks was still there, but I could see one had tilted slightly. I held my breath and stepped outside. The air smelled damp. My feet felt unsteady on the grass. I crept closer. The sound stopped. I shone the flashlight on the cover. Nothing moved. I put my ear to the metal plate and listened. I could hear a rough sound like large hands or claws running along stone. I felt my stomach tighten. I pictured something climbing slowly up the inside wall, pressing its weight against the barrier I had made. I pressed my hand against the metal plate to feel if there was movement. It felt steady for a moment, but then I felt a small push from below. It was slight, but it was there. I almost dropped the flashlight. I stepped back, breathing hard. I stacked another heavy object on top, a large paving stone I found near the fence. I went back inside. I sat on the floor in the living room, trying to calm down. I drank water and waited for morning. At dawn, I went out again. Nothing had changed, but I knew it was still down there. I could feel its presence even though I could not see it. For the next week, I barely slept. I kept hearing the whisper at random times. It never stopped calling my name. Sometimes it sounded annoyed, sometimes calm, but it never sounded human. The scratching sounds were more frequent. The metal plate sometimes shifted slightly, making a dull clang. I added more weight each time I heard this. Eventually, I had a small mountain of heavy things piled on top of the well. I tried ignoring it, but I felt the tension inside my chest every time I listened closely. The voice was always there, just under the surface. Sometimes I stood by the back door and listened. Sometimes I thought about calling someone, but I was too embarrassed. What would I say? That I found a hole in my yard that whispers my name and tries to push its way out? It sounded insane, so I managed on my own. I kept the cover secure. I stayed indoors at night. I wore earplugs to bed. Still, through the plugs, I often sensed a faint vibration, like distant breathing. It made my skin crawl. A few days ago, I woke up and found that the top block had shifted again. I added more weight. Now there's a stack of heavy debris over that sealed opening. I can barely see the original spot. It's just a mound in the yard. I avoid going near it after dark. When I do, I sometimes hear my name so close it makes my throat tighten. The voice never leaves. It's quiet during the day, but at night, it is always there. It whispers at uneven intervals. It calls me. The scratching and the pushing continue. Sometimes the metal plate creaks. Sometimes I think I see the mound move slightly when I shine a light on it. I haven't let it out. I don't know what it wants, but it keeps climbing, keeps pushing, keeps saying my name. I feel sweat on my face every time I think about it. My hands tremble when I remember that first day, when it was just some old boards covering a hole. Now I'm stuck with this. It's in my yard, and I can't get rid of it. I can only wait, keep piling weight on top and hope that it never breaks through to the surface.